Night. Nisa shivered in her bed, the cold biting deep, a glacial chill seeping into her bones. She felt as though she might freeze to death. Just as the frigid air became unbearable, a voice sliced through the silence. Dietrich Lagrange calling her name. She jolted awake, her heart hammering against her ribs. Rubbing her nose, she thought, him again. "Hello, Dietrich," she mumbled, acknowledging the 8-year-old boy. "Did I wake you?" he asked. She denied having been asleep, hesitation clinging to her words as she fumbled for an explanation. Dietrich's shadow shifted, as if offering a silent comfort. She observed how he commanded his shadow as easily as his own limbs. How extraordinary, she thought, the world's most powerful villain. She reached out, attempting to touch the inky blackness, but her hand passed right through. Anissa contemplated her predicament. She was living inside a novel she'd read in her past life, their Rose War. The boy before her was Dietrich Lagrange, destined to become the sole heir of the Lagrange family after vanquishing numerous contenders for the inheritance. She knew that soon, due to his exceptional magical abilities, he would become the youngest Grand Duke the Lagrange family had ever seen. Yet, his future was a tragic one. He was destined to be buried alive by the novel's protagonist, Hermann Euclid. Dietrich, the villain. Her thoughts were interrupted by the boy himself. "Is someone there?" he asked, tilting his head. Confusion clouded her features. "Who?" He waved a dismissive hand. "Nothing," he said, then changed the subject. "How are your abilities coming along?" A wave of despondency washed over Anissa. People claimed she shared the same birth parents as Dietrich, yet unlike him, she was born without the power of shadows. I haven't developed them yet," she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. Tears welled in her eyes. "I'm sorry," she choked out. Anissa considered her true identity. She wasn't Dietrich's biological sister. She was a Euclid, born into the family's sworn enemies of the Lagranges. Her brother, Hermann Euclid, was the one destined to bury Dietrich alive. He didn't know of her existence. While the sun god favored the Euclids, she was the only member of her family without the power of the sun. Her mother's cruel words echoed in her mind, the woman refusing to believe she was her child upon seeing her. "I wish you were dead." Unwanted, despised. Anissa's life had taken a sharp turn when the Lagranges, the Euclid's rivals, had kidnapped her. Yet, her family, deeming her a burden, hadn't made any real effort to retrieve her. Strangely, the Lagranges had taken her in as their youngest daughter, though she suspected it was more out of convenience than affection. In this viper's nest of a family, Anissa admitted, Dietrich was the only one she could trust. She lamented her fate. A noble family at last, yet no one cared for her. Officially registered as the youngest daughter, the Lagranges were unwilling to spend resources on a child without shadow magic. Determined to survive, she decided to ingratiate herself with Dietrich, seeing him as her sole ally. He offered her a small, cuddly bear. "Hold on to this for me," he instructed. Confused, she asked, "What is this?" He tossed it casually into her lap. A jingle bear. Annoyed, Anissa thought he must be treating her like a child, as if she would play with a jingling toy. "I don't want it," she declared stubbornly. "It's a baby's toy." However, as she picked up the bear, a sharp object suddenly sprung from within. A knife. She stared at it, utterly stunned. "That knife," Dietrich explained, "will only react to your touch. No one else's. If anyone tries to hurt you in the shadows like before," he instructed, "use it. Just hold the jingle bear up to their neck and shake it." Panic flared within Anissa. "He's mad," she thought frantically. "Do I look like someone who can slit someone's throat at my age?" She flung the knife away, her voice rising in alarm. "I can't do that." "Why not?" Dietrich demanded, his tone sharp. His intensity frightened her, and she couldn't help but wonder how an 8-year-old could appear so menacing. Overwhelmed, Anissa burst into tears, insisting that she was just a baby and couldn't possibly do what he asked. Tears welled in her eyes as she repeatedly refused. The sheer absurdity of her situation left Anissa bewildered. She couldn't even read yet, and Dietrich expected her to kill someone. It made no sense. Frustrated, she questioned the chaotic nature of the Lagrange family. Why, as a member of an aristocratic family, second only to royalty, was her dream of a luxurious life now a living nightmare? Feeling the hopelessness of her fate, she began to weep, lamenting that her life was already ruined. Thinking back to her previous life, Anissa remembered the constant neglect from her family. She had always been overshadowed by her siblings, treated as the family disgrace. When she was reborn as a duke's daughter, she had hoped for a dramatic change in her life, only to find herself now Anissa Euclid, a character in the novel Their Rose War. While her first family had at least cared for and raised her, here was worse. Her sigh caught the attention of the butler, Lancel, who looked perplexed. He was annoyed that a mere infant could sigh so deeply. His irritation was palpable as he grumbled about her being a nuisance to the family. Anissa bristled inwardly, thinking she understood him perfectly. She scoffed at him, realizing they were both the same, stuck at the bottom rung of the social ladder. Without any connections to speak of, cradling Anissa's bassinet, Lancel continued his frustrated lament about his own fate. He cursed the deceased Lady Camille, expressing disbelief that she had died giving birth to this thing, angrily questioning why such a fate had befallen him. He bitterly wished she were still alive, so he wouldn't have to deal with the unpleasantries of changing diapers. His loud complaints made Anissa's ears ache, and she silently voiced her own annoyance. Anissa considered the situation. Lancel had been a loyal servant to Camille, who, in the novel Their Rose War, was one of the many wives of the Grand Duke Lagrange. She was the mother of the main antagonist, Dietrich, and stood in opposition to the protagonist. While most believed Camille had died, giving birth to Anissa, the truth was far more complicated. Anissa wasn't her daughter at all. She recalled the image of Camille examining her as a newborn, holding her aloft with one hand and declaring her Euclid. Anissa remembered her true origins. She was born into the rival Euclid ducal family. Despite this, she had been struck by Camille's breathtaking beauty, silently marveling at how stunning she was. Anissa recalled her tragic past, remembering Camille's involvement in her kidnapping. However, Camille had ultimately been killed by Euclid Knights, who hadn't come to rescue Anissa, but to eliminate her. She admitted to herself that she had no memory of what happened after that fateful event. Camille and her unborn child had both been killed. Yet somehow, Anissa had survived, later to be mistaken as Camille's daughter within the Lagrange family. While being alive was certainly better than being dead, her new life within the Lagrange family was hardly an improvement. Lancel, filled with resentment, roughly grabbed Anissa's hand, causing her to cry out in pain. Inwardly, she complained about how much it hurt. Annoyed by her tears, Lancel snapped at her, telling her she was too loud and that he was the one who should be crying. Trembling with fear, Anissa hiccuped, sensing the bitterness within him. His next words stung deeply. He said that she was the one who should have died. Anissa noticed a dark aura surrounding Lancel's heart, a manifestation of deep hatred, but her attention was drawn to the blue at its center. She understood. The blue aura reflected grief. Watching Lancel weep for Lady Camille, she realized he must have loved her deeply. Recalling her own lack of a Euclid family's signature solar magic, Anissa thought of the goddess Heredia, who possessed the power to read auras and foresee the future. As Lancel sobbed, Anissa wondered if he would ever stop. When he finally quieted, she assumed it was over. To her shock, however, he left the room without even feeding her. Abandoned and hungry, she cried out, cursing him internally for neglecting her needs. Anissa bitterly contemplated her situation. She realized Lancel cared only enough to keep her barely alive. She blamed Grand Duke Dietrich Lagrange for her predicament. Despite being a villain, at least Dietrich in the novel only focused on one heroine. Dietrich, by comparison, was a despicable man with over 20 official children, many neglected and forgotten. She reflected that Dietrich showed no love for any of his children. To gain even a sliver of his attention, his offspring were forced to endure a cruel and inhumane competition for inheritance. This contest went far beyond simple tests of strength or intelligence, pushing the limits of human endurance and morality. Anissa lamented that she, too, would have to face countless life-threatening situations. As a result of this brutal system, Anissa noticed two boys in the distance seemingly discussing whether to eliminate her. As they approached, she became terrified. Confirming no one was around, they decided to act. Anissa could sense their malice, noting their bright yellow auras, realizing they were relishing the situation. This, she thought, was part of the Lagrange family's brutal competition, where powerless newborns were often the first casualties. In desperation, she cried out, hoping her tears would have some effect, thinking that perhaps these boys still possessed some shred of conscience. Hearing her cries, Dietrich arrived and questioned what the boys were doing. The boys were startled by his appearance, displaying a mixture of fear and defiance, one warning Dietrich not to interfere. Anissa realized it wasn't her cries that stopped them. It was Dietrich's arrival, and she wondered how he would handle the situation. One boy angrily told Dietrich to mind his own business, but upon hearing his name, Anissa suddenly realized who he was. She connected him to the future Grand Duke and the most formidable villain of this world. Unable to lift her head in her infant body, she trembled nervously, thinking of his terrifying reputation. Dietrich didn't flinch, repeating his question with an air of authority, causing the boys to hesitate and recoil. Using his shadow powers, Dietrich swiftly dealt them a lesson. Anissa watched in awe, marveling at his power, thinking how strong and handsome he was for a child. She began to understand why he would grow into the story's greatest villain, as his appearance seemed almost radiant to her. One of the boys yelled at Dietrich, attempting to explain that in the brutal competition for inheritance, every newborn was an easy target. Dietrich calmly countered that this was only true if they had no one to protect them. He sternly questioned if they dare to harm this infant in front of him. The boys stammered an apology, acknowledging the child as Dietrich's sister, but were quickly cut off. Dietrich scoffed, denying he intervened out of familial affection, calling them utterly foolish. The irritated boys demanded to know why Dietrich had attacked them. With cool authority, Dietrich revealed that in this ruthless game, protection was a valuable skill. Startled by his words, the boys quickly apologized, claiming they didn't know she was under his protection. Dietrich ordered them to leave. Frightened, the boys immediately fled. Anissa observed Dietrich with a mixture of awe and anxiety, wondering how a 6-year-old could exude such an intimidating aura. She recognized him as the key to her survival, resolving internally to rely on him as her protector until she could escape this perilous environment. Watching him clench his fists, Anissa flinched, wondering what he had done to the two boys. She had assumed he would let them go, but realized he possessed no such mercy. As Dietrich walked towards her, Anissa grew anxious, recalling how he had ultimately used her after discovering she was Herman's younger sister, despite his reputation. She knew Dietrich was her only hope. In this helpless, infantile state, to ensure her survival, Anissa resolved to win his favor and secure his protection. Anissa attempted to charm Dietrich with a sweet smile, but it only seemed to confuse him. She reflected that he wouldn't discover her true identity until after the war, and resolved to live until she could escape, attempting to appeal to any softness he might possess. She made cute expressions, extending her small arms, thinking these endearing actions would surely win him over. However, Dietrich responded with indifference, leaving her disheartened, realizing her efforts were ineffective. Observing his aura, she noted it was unlike any she had seen before, completely devoid of color. Undeterred, she tried to make baby noises, but Dietrich immediately and sternly ordered her to be quiet. Anissa attempted to grab Dietrich's hand, but he pulled his hand away, asking what she was doing. She smiled inwardly, thinking her actions were merely an innocent attempt to hold hands, determined to melt his cold demeanor. She reminded herself that even the hardest hearts could be softened with a gentle touch. Ignoring his resistance, she made playful sounds and grasped his finger. Dietrich seemed perplexed, asking what BA meant, to which Anissa subtly gestured towards him, implying she was calling him brother. She inwardly mocked his serious expression, thinking he was too young to be worried about wrinkles. Just as Dietrich was about to say something, the door opened and a heavy, dark aura entered the room. Anissa froze in fear, recognizing the terrifying crimson aura even without seeing the person. It was Dietrich Lagrange, the head of the Lagrange family. Dietrich questioned Dietrich's presence in the room. Dietrich calmly replied that he was fulfilling the conditions of the competition. Dietrich seemed intrigued, but dismissive, inquiring about the infant in the room. Anissa, hearing him refer to her as that thing, bristled inwardly, silently mocking his dehumanization of her. Dietrich coldly explained that she was Camille Lagrange's daughter, his tone making Camille, his own mother, sound like a stranger. Dietrich appeared indifferent. Asking who Camille was, leaving Anissa appalled by his lack of basic awareness. She cursed him internally, furious that he didn't even remember his own wife. Derek finally recalled Camille as the war prisoner he had purchased, further demeaning her existence. He complained that her death in childbirth was a waste of money, though he conceded that producing a potential heir candidate at least gave her some value, his words dripping with callous indifference. Anissa silently raged at Derek, furious at his dismissive and cruel way of speaking about Dietrich and their mother's death. Derek coldly stated that those like Dietrich tended to die first in the Lagrange sibling heir competition. He suggested that if Dietrich couldn't prove his worth, he should die quickly to avoid wasting resources. Dietrich calmly acknowledged the statement, but Anissa seethed internally at Derek's arrogance. As Derek turned to leave, he advised Dietrich to act wisely, to which Anissa responded with a sarcastic middle finger directed at his back. Unfortunately, Dietrich caught her gesture, causing Anissa to tremble in panic. Dietrich asked if her hand was broken, to which Anissa offered a nervous smile. He then placed his hand on her forehead, using magic to assess her abilities. Dietrich noticed he couldn't sense any magic within her, making Anissa realize he was using a probing spell. She marveled that a 6-year-old already possessed such advanced knowledge, yet remained confident her own magic was well hidden. Dietrich coldly declared she wouldn't live long, but Anissa was determined to prove him wrong. Clutching his finger, she offered a defiant smile, already scheming to seek refuge in his shadow. Alone, Anissa questioned her plan of survival through Dietrich's favor, wondering its usefulness if he rarely appeared. The sudden creak of the door startled her. She turned, hoping for Dietrich, but was met with the disappointing sight of Lancel, the food delivery boy. As Anissa gurgled something akin to delivery, she inwardly scoffed, deeming him nothing more than an irritating extra. Lancel roughly shoved the bottle into her mouth, shushing her and expressing impatience with her babbling. Anissa glared at him, inwardly fuming at the cold milk he provided. She considered the frigid northern climate as a possible cause, but ultimately settled on Lancel's incompetence as the culprit. Anissa initially tried to convince herself Lancel hadn't delivered cold milk on purpose, but as he made an irritated comment about her will to live, she trembled with anger, inwardly accusing him of deliberate coldness. She vowed to fire him the moment she had the power. Despite her annoyance, when Lancel patted her back to help her burp, she grudgingly decided to extend his employment by 10 minutes. Mentally noting her gratitude, she offered Lancel a smile. He asked if she was bored. To her surprise, he lifted her from the cradle, leading her to believe this might be a significant moment. However, her excitement quickly faded as he simply placed her on the floor, stating he had work to do. Anissa felt a pang of victory as Lancel finally released her from the confines of her cradle, leaving her to play on her own. She waved cheerfully as he departed. He likely hadn't noticed her progress, she mused as he paid her little attention. With newfound determination, she fixed her gaze on the door. Having mastered crawling, Anissa confidently propelled herself towards the door as it began to close. Just in time, she jammed a toy beneath the door, preventing it from latching. Crawling out of the room and into the hall, she was determined to find Dietrich. Pausing, she sniffed the air. Though feeling somewhat like a hound, she decided to follow his faint scent. Her pursuit led her to the place where Dietrich spent his childhood, the ominous garden of dead roses. Anissa crawled into the gloomy garden, thinking what a dreadful place it was. But it seemed fitting for someone like Dietrich. Spotting him in the distance, she noticed a shovel in his hand. He stood beside a boy buried up to his neck. The boy struggled, yelling at Dietrich to let him out, calling him a bastard. Dietrich coldly reminded the boy, whose name was Olrich, that he had broken the rules of their game. Initially nervous and shocked by the sight, Anissa tried to tug on Dietrich's pants leg to get his attention, babbling his name. Dietrich glanced down at her with slight annoyance, picking her up and asking what she wanted, mockingly telling her to speak like a human. Anissa thought with frustration that she couldn't exactly pronounce words properly. It made her situation all the more frustrating. Anissa beamed, believing her adorably charming expression would surely captivate Dietrich. She hoped her cute smile would have an effect on him, secretly wondering if he found her endearing. To her delight, Dietrich adjusted his hold on her, making her more comfortable. Anissa felt things were going her way. A flicker of hope sparked within Anissa. Meanwhile, Olrich, buried in the earth, glared furiously at Dietrich, demanding to know what he was looking at. Anissa, suddenly remembering Ulrich's presence, realized she'd momentarily forgotten him. A nervous sweat broke out as she recalled that in the novel, Olrich would later become Dietrich's most trusted right-hand man. She wondered, bewildered, why he was in such a predicament now. Anissa recalled Ulrich Lagrange's role, remembering him as the one who followed Dietrich's orders and ultimately killed Dietrich Lagrange, the head of the Lagrange family. Even when Dietrich was buried alive by the protagonist, Hermann, Olrich remained loyal to him until the very end. Looking at the situation before her, Anissa pointed a tiny finger at Olrich, silently questioning why he was buried in the ground. Olrich snapped at her, irritated, telling her not to point. Dietrich glanced at Anissa, commenting that she sounded like a chick, causing Anissa to giggle inwardly. She interpreted his comment as him finding her cute and felt a momentary surge of happiness. However, Dietrich quickly put her down, jolting Anissa out of her elation. She thought, annoyed, that she shouldn't have gotten so carried away. Dietrich set Anissa down, telling her to crawl, and announced he was leaving. Anissa let out a small, panicked yelp, trying to stop him. Simultaneously, Olrich yelled from the ground, demanding to be let out first. Determined to follow Dietrich, Anissa began to crawl, thinking this might be her only chance to stay with him. She marveled at how quickly Dietrich moved. She struggled to keep up, terrified of losing sight of him. She feared that if she missed this opportunity, she wouldn't know when she'd see him again. In her haste, Anissa accidentally cut her hand on a shard of glass. Blood welled from the wound, and the pain made her cry out loud. Hearing her cries, Dietrich paused briefly, looking startled. Anissa thought bitterly through her tears that her brother wouldn't even look back at her. She cried harder, both from the pain and the frustration. As she sobbed, she noticed Dietrich's aura turn red. Fearfully, she thought he must be angry at her crying. She frantically tried to stop crying, even hiccuping, worried that he might kill her if she didn't quiet down. Dietrich approached her, coldly asking why she had stopped making noise. He added that if she was going to die anyway, it was better to die sooner. Anissa squeezed her eyes shut, bracing herself, thinking this was the end. However, Dietrich unexpectedly removed the glass shard from her hand. She thought, incredulously, that he might actually be kind. Dietrich said nothing, only wiped away her tears, commenting that she was a strange baby. Still stunned, Anissa retorted internally, thinking that it wasn't her who was strange, but him. After all, he was the one burying people alive. Dietrich bandaged Anissa's injured hand with cloth. Anissa, touched, yet confused, thought that he didn't seem at all like someone who would grow up to be a villain. Her hand still throbbed, but she held back her tears, worried that crying would make him dislike her. Still, she wondered how she was supposed to get back to her room in this state. To her surprise, Dietrich picked her up. Anissa was astonished, thinking he could have easily left her there, but he hadn't. He seemed much gentler than she had imagined. She couldn't reconcile this kindness with the image of the ruthless villain who would destroy an entire village in the future. Then she thought of the Lagrange family's cruelty, realizing what an unbearable place it must be for children. Looking around, she noticed how empty Dahlia Palace seemed, suddenly aware of the lack of people around. She guessed it might be due to Camille's absence, making the palace feel particularly desolate. A maid asked rudely what had happened. Dietrich calmly explained that the baby was injured. The maid responded indifferently, so Anissa bristled, wondering why the servants harbored such animosity towards them. What had they done to deserve it? The maid asked what she should do. Anissa glanced at Dietrich, wondering if he would permit the maid's insolence. If he killed a servant, wouldn't he be disqualified? Dietrich ordered the maid to treat Anissa. The maid gasped, pointing an accusing finger at him. "You're the one who hurt her," she cried. "Why should I treat her? You attacked a baby who can't even walk." Anissa was stunned by the maid's words, unable to believe she would say such a thing. Dietrich denied hurting Anissa, but the maid accused him of lying. "Everyone in the Dahlia Palace knows your mother was a slave," she sneered. "Your lies betray your low-born nature. If you're ashamed," she continued, "you should at least try to hide it." Dietrich's jaw tightened, but he still politely explained to the maid that a shard of glass had cut Anissa's hand. If it wasn't disinfected and treated, it could fester. The maid responded nonchalantly, "Let fester. She'll die soon enough anyway." Anissa cried out, insisting she would live. The maid claimed the Dahlia Palace had no money for medicine, and she had none to give. Anissa saw Dietrich's aura flare red. He was angry. He glared at the maid, accusing her and Lancel of stealing the gold they were allotted. The maid denied the accusation, claiming there was no proof and that she was innocent. As the maid moved to close the door, Dietrich's glare stopped her. He insisted that if she couldn't treat Anissa herself, she should at least hand over the medicine. The maid flinched, trying to shut the door, repeating that she had none. Anissa wondered, bewildered, what the maid was doing. The maid also claimed she had no money. Anissa noticed Dietrich was still holding the door and wondered if the maid intended to slam it on his hand. Anissa scrambled up and grabbed Dietrich's leg, stopping him. Finally, the maid succeeded in closing the door. Anissa thought she had successfully prevented them from hurting each other. Dietrich looked down at her and asked why she had pulled him. Anissa explained that he would have been hurt if she hadn't. Dietrich sighed in frustration, muttering disdainfully about talking to a baby. Anissa noticed the lonely look on his face, remembering how sad he seemed whenever he simply looked at her. She decided to offer him a smile, feeling it was the right moment. Dietrich snapped, calling Anissa an idiot and asking if she was that stupid. Anissa retorted that she wasn't stupid. Dietrich sighed in frustration, which annoyed Anissa, who thought he was acting like a child himself. He then picked her up and carried her out of the room, telling her to be quiet. Anissa wondered where he was taking her. She realized they were heading to his room. She was surprised to find it dusty, noting it was even worse than her own. Dietrich retrieved some medicine, telling Anissa he'd never treated anyone else before. As he unwrapped the cloth from her wound, he told her not to cry, because he hated crybabies. Anissa thought it was a bit much to ask her not to cry, as crying was an involuntary, natural response. Anissa's eyes welled up, but she tried to hold back the tears, thinking she would try her best to control her crying as Dietrich applied the medicine to her wound. The pain became unbearable, and she couldn't help but cry out. Despite the searing pain, she was more worried about Dietrich's aura turning red. But he simply stared at her with quiet, dark eyes. She noticed there was no blue, the color of sadness, in his aura, yet she could still sense the pervasive sadness emanating from him. The next day, Anissa awoke in her room, realizing she must have fainted yesterday after Dietrich had treated her wound. She was surprised to find the pain hadn't lessened much. Observing her surroundings, she realized Dietrich's situation wasn't much better than her own. Despite being a candidate for inheritance, he had no family support, unlike Olrich. It seemed everyone looked down on him. She also suspected he didn't receive much financial support. Lancel and the maid's wages were likely lower than other palace servants, and these two were responsible for the upkeep of this enormous palace. While she understood their predicament, she couldn't help but think they shouldn't be so harsh towards a child, as children were the future. When Lancel entered the room, Anissa couldn't help but smile, thinking he appeared just as she was thinking about him. She called out to him, demanding to be fed. But noticing the bandages on her hand, Lancel merely commented that at least she was still alive. Anissa was annoyed by his lack of concern, thinking he should be more caring when a baby was injured. However, with a dark aura, Lancel responded harshly, questioning why he should care, accusing her of causing Camille's death. Anissa was bewildered by this sudden shift, unsure what had happened. Lancel continued, saying that if it weren't for Anissa, Camille would still be alive. Anissa felt a surge of anxiety, trying to recall a time she had purified someone's aura, and began shaking her hand to turn the aura white. To her surprise, the dark aura around Lancel turned white. Anissa was thrilled, thinking it actually worked. Finally, Lancel put the bottle in her mouth, but Anissa, thinking about the cold milk, wished he would warm it next time. While feeding Anissa, Lancel sighed, expressing his discontent, hoping things in the palace would improve when Dietrich became the heir. He wondered if things were so bad because Dietrich wasn't the official heir yet. He questioned whether he should resign, feeling like he wasn't doing anything useful. Hearing this, Anissa thought he really should resign, hoping for a better servant. Lancel then mentioned that Dietrich hadn't received any food in a long time, yet he was somehow still alive. Shocked by these words, Anissa started coughing. Lancel continued, wondering if Janine was even taking care of Dietrich, pointing out there weren't even breadcrumbs in the kitchen, and he didn't know how Dietrich was surviving. Anissa cried out in indignation, but Lancel scolded her to be quiet, reminding her that at least she was getting fed. Anissa felt frustrated, thinking it wasn't nearly enough, appalled that they were starving a 6-year-old, realizing this place was even more deranged than she thought. Seeing Anissa drinking the milk, Lrangee remarked that it was making him hungry too. Anissa was shocked by his selfishness, wondering how he could think about his own hunger while a 6-year-old was starving. Lrangee told her to stay put, saying he'd be back in the evening, and left. As he departed, Anissa pondered the family's miserable situation. She thought that if Herman had grown up in this environment, he might have become a villain too. Anissa made up her mind. From now on, she would be in charge of Dietrich's food. She grabbed the bottle and climbed out of the crib. Determined to bring Dietrich food, Anissa crawled towards the table, thinking about finding Dietrich and giving him something to eat, but she wanted to see herself in the mirror first. She saw a mirror on the table and, feeling she could reach it, moved towards it. She remembered the novel describing babies as cute, but Lrangee always called her ugly, and Dietrich didn't seem to find her cute either. As she shakily climbed onto the table, she proudly noted that she could now stand and walk a little. Finally, she arrived in front of the mirror, gasping with delight. She thought she looked absolutely adorable. The memory of Lrangee calling her ugly, however, pricked at her, a sudden sting of annoyance. She couldn't believe he would say such a thing. There had to be something wrong with his eyes, she decided. Perhaps Lrangee thought she was cursed. Anissa mused because of her red eyes. While many Northerners shared the trait, Southerners often associated red eyes with a curse. It made her an easy target for ridicule, she admitted. She quickly dismissed the thought, however, refocusing on how cute and pretty she was. Thinking of Dietrich's features, she objectively conceded that, at their age, he was probably more conventionally attractive. Then, remembering her purpose, she resolved to feed him first. She decided to drink some milk herself to bolster her strength for the journey ahead. Finished, she excitedly declared her intention to bring food to Dietrich, referring to herself as his older sister. She arrived at the garden where she had met Dietrich the previous day. Seeing him, she smiled, attempting to walk on 2 legs, albeit still a bit wobbly. As she surveyed the surroundings, she couldn't help but notice the unkempt state of the area, realizing its neglected maintenance. Dietrich picked Anissa up and sat her beside him. When he asked her why she was there, Anissa playfully uttered a bah, thinking that sometimes, just sometimes, Dietrich seemed to care a little. When Dietrich asked about himself, she was momentarily caught off guard, but her giggles and clapping indicated her amusement that he remembered her calling him bah. When Dietrich inquired about her laughter, Anissa offered him the milk bottle as a reward, assuming he would understand. A confused Dietrich asked what it was. Anissa impatiently replied that it was food, explaining it was a baby's bottle. Despite her encouragement for him to take it and drink, Dietrich refused, telling her to stop saying Baba. Anissa was frustrated, wishing she could articulate herself better, slightly annoyed by Dietrich's teasing. Because of Dietrich's refusal, Anissa tried demonstrating again, offering him the bottle. Surely, she thought, he must understand now. Considering all the effort she had made to get there, when she repeated the offer and encouraged him to drink, the stubborn Dietrich refused again. This prompted a bewildered Anissa to pat his shoulder, though she thought the milk would be surprisingly delicious. Dietrich, however, angrily threw the bottle away. He firmly stated that he didn't want it. Anissa, shocked and disappointed, felt that considering she had crawled all this way to see him, Dietrich could at least pretend to be nice. She retrieved the bottle, her frustration mounting, unable to understand his stubbornness. Anissa, heartbroken and dejected, clutched the bottle on the verge of tears. She fought to control her emotions, trying to convince herself not to cry. When Dietrich noticed, he picked her up, gently asking why she was crying. Anissa, still upset, tried to appear strong, but inside, she was hurt by the situation. Seeing her distress, Dietrich took the bottle from her and began to drink. After finishing, he returned the bottle to Anissa, asking if she felt better. To her surprise, his tone wasn't harsh, and a flicker of joy warmed her as she witnessed his willingness to drink the milk she had brought. It was a small gesture, but it made her think that maybe, just maybe, he was starting to care. Anissa climbed down from the cradle, holding the bottle and wrapping it in a cloth. It had been a month, she reflected, since she started bringing Dietrich milk. Despite her daily visits, he had never come to see her, and she felt a pang of resentment at his perceived lack of gratitude. She recalled Lancel's frequent complaints about her drinking too much milk. Anissa walked towards the table, remembering Lrangee had left cookies there for her, and decided to bring them to Dietrich. However, as she reached for the cookies, she accidentally knocked them to the floor. She quickly scooped up the fallen cookies and tucked them into her pocket, figuring the 5-second rule still applied. Cookies secured, she felt ready to find Dietrich. Still unable to walk long distances, Anissa crawled across the hall, when suddenly Olrich appeared before her. He recognized her as the baby from before, making Anissa tense. She wondered what Olrich was doing in the Dahlia Palace, unsure how to handle the situation. Olrich picked Anissa up, asking if she was Dietrich's sister. Anissa, feeling anxious, tried to wriggle free. Noticing her struggles, Olrich asked where she was going and what she was carrying on her back. Anissa, irritated, told him to let her go, but Olrich continued to question whether a baby should be wandering around alone. It was then Anissa noticed Olrich's aura was red, unsettling her. She decided to be cautious, sensing a hint of hostility from him. Though his aura wasn't entirely red, Olrich rocked Anissa back and forth, contemplating using her to threaten Dietrich. Anissa felt a flicker of amusement, doubting Dietrich would be swayed by Olrich because of her. She decided to let him hold her, thinking it might be easier to get to Dietrich this way. As Olrich noticed she wasn't afraid of him, Anissa smiled inwardly, recalling she'd already dealt with 2 children who wanted to harm her and Dietrich, so she wasn't intimidated by Olrich. Olrich commented that Anissa was a strange baby. Anissa thought to herself that she was indeed cute and must appear even cuter to others. She figured since they would be on the same side later, it was a good idea to get on his good side now. So, she offered Olrich a cookie. Olrich, surprised, accepted the cookie, even blushing as he thanked her. Anissa thought he must really like the servant's cookies, but then Olrich suddenly spat the cookie out, shocking Anissa. Annoyed, she scolded him for wasting the cookie. Olrich, flustered, accused her of poisoning the cookie, saying that since she was Dietrich's sister, there was no way she would give him a cookie without reason. An exasperated Anissa decided to dispel Olrich's suspicions by eating a cookie herself. He was probably deceived by lies his whole life, she thought. These cookies weren't poisoned. Olrich gasped, thinking she was eating a poisoned cookie. Anissa looked at him and confidently declared it wasn't poisoned. Despite this, Olrich still didn't believe her, yelling for her to spit it out, worried the cookie was poisoned. Anissa, unfazed, swallowed the cookie. Olrich panicked, convinced Dietrich must have told her to poison it. He became frantic, demanding she spit it out, saying she would die. Anissa, finding it amusing, replied that Dietrich had never given her a cookie. Olrich, now desperate, considered making her vomit. He grabbed her legs and held her upside down, insisting she throw up. Anissa felt dizzy, thinking the cookie wasn't poison at all and that Olrich was being ridiculous. Just then, Dietrich arrived, asking Olrich what he was doing. Anissa breathed a sigh of relief, thinking she was about to be in trouble, but managed to cough, regaining her composure. Seeing Anissa's state, Dietrich asked again, demanding an explanation. Olrich replied that Anissa had swallowed poison. Dietrich glared at Olrich, asking if he had poisoned her. Anissa felt the tension in the air, noticing Dietrich's aura was dark and cold, almost pure killing intent, an aura she had never seen in a child. Olrich, flustered, denied poisoning her, arguing that unlike the cowardly Gallen brothers, he wouldn't target a baby. He said Anissa must have eaten the cookie by mistake. Dietrich pointed out sarcastically that if Olrich hadn't poisoned her, then why was she poisoned? Anissa, realizing the situation was turning dire, decided to take the opportunity to crawl away. Dietrich declared that even idiots had their rankings, and Olrich was lower than the Gallen brothers. Olrich, stunned, asked what he meant. Dietrich, with a laugh, replied that he didn't need poison to deal with someone like Olrich. Left alone, he'd eliminate himself. This enraged Olrich, who roared furiously at Dietrich. Anissa, sensing the tension, felt a surge of fear and wanted to distance herself from the escalating conflict, desperate not to be caught in the crossfire. As Olrich demanded to know why Anissa had given him the cookie, Anissa, mid-crawl, froze, her gaze snapping nervously between the two boys. Olrich asked Anissa if she had offered him the cookie out of genuine kindness, and not because it was poisoned. He sat beside her, pressing her for an answer. Anissa thought to herself that she had offered it because he was Dietrich's future subordinate, and she wanted to show some friendliness, though she doubted he would understand. She stood up, thinking it would be nice if he liked her even a little. But then she noticed his tense posture and the yellowish-green aura surrounding him, unsure of what it signified. Olrich grabbed her hand and apologized. He said he hadn't realized she'd given him the cookie out of pure goodwill. Anissa realized the aura represented gratitude. He patted her head sincerely, apologizing for the misunderstanding and for wasting the cookie. Anissa thought it was no big deal. But then Olrich mentioned that Dahlia Palace was impoverished because it housed lowly slaves. Anissa, though stung by his words, acknowledged their truth. Olrich, feeling guilty, apologized again for his behavior. Anissa decided to forgive him for his earlier accusations. She wondered if he was always like this, as he'd rarely been around before. Just then, Dietrich approached and scooped Anissa up into his arms, demanding to know why Olrich was at the supposedly lowly Dahlia Palace. Anissa noted the anger in Dietrich's voice, wondering if he was offended by Olrich's disrespect towards their home. Olrich revealed he was there to challenge Dietrich to a rematch of their previous game. Though Anissa thought the outcome was obvious, Dietrich scoffed, questioning Olrich's peculiar taste for being buried alive again. Olrich, flushing, insisted that the previous match was a draw since he hadn't died. He pressed for another contest, but Dietrich brushed him off, saying he'd already eliminated 2 candidates and didn't need to waste his energy on someone like him. Olrich, exasperated, swung at Dietrich, who easily dodged the blow. When Olrich tried again, Dietrich tripped him. He sent him sprawling and told him to stay out of trouble. Olrich, scrambling to his feet, yelled that his name was Anissa Lagrange, insisting it was important. Dietrich showed no interest in Ulrich's name, caring only that Olrich didn't touch him. Olrich, furious, yelled at Dietrich not to underestimate him and threw another punch, but Dietrich used his aura to lift Olrich into the air and slam him back down to the ground. Anissa was shocked by Dietrich's use of shadow abilities, scarcely able to believe what she was seeing. Anissa watched, a mixture of shock and worry churning within her, as Dietrich used his shadow abilities to lift and subdue Olrich. The intensity of their fight frightened her, and she crawled towards Dietrich, fearing they might seriously hurt each other. Trying to stop them, she grabbed Dietrich, pleading in her babyish voice that killing Olrich would cause trouble, especially with Derek to deal with. Dietrich responded coldly that if Olrich spoke another word of nonsense, he would obliterate him. Releasing Olrich, he turned and walked away. Anissa, startled by Dietrich's abrupt departure, hurried after him, her mind racing with strategies to build a connection with him. But Dietrich was already too far ahead. As she scrambled to catch up, she accidentally let out a loud fart, mortified by the embarrassing sound. As both Olrich and Dietrich watched her, Anissa squirmed, shame threatening to spill over into tears. Still mortified by the embarrassing situation, Anissa desperately prayed for some semblance of dignity as Dietrich approached. "Go away," she blurted out suddenly. "The game's over." Ignoring her protests, Dietrich scooped her up, teasingly asking if she needed a diaper change and wrinkling his nose at the lingering odor. Anissa's face burned crimson. She wriggled in his grasp, scolding him for his ingratitude. "I was going to bring you milk," she accused. Olrich, noticing the bundle on Anissa's shoulder, asked if it was more milk, questioning whether she intended for him to drink it. Annoyed, Anissa mumbled that he'd ruined everything. Dietrich shot Olrich a sharp look. "She offered me a cookie," he stated, his voice heavy with a reprimand that made Olrich shrink back. He turned to Anissa. "Didn't you offer me a cookie?" he asked, a question that filled her with a confusing mix of embarrassment and something akin to shyness. She couldn't bear to refuse him, not with that endearing look on his face. Opening her fist, however, she found the cookie crumbled. Hesitantly, she offered him the milk bottle instead. But when he didn't immediately take it, her anxiety spiked. "Take it," she urged, but as he snatched it from her hand, the bottle slipped open, splashing milk all over Dietrich. Anissa froze, terrified he would kill her for the mishap. Trembling, she silently prayed for a better life in her next reincarnation. To her astonishment, however, Dietrich simply wiped the milk away. Instead of a violent reaction, he calmly told her she should apologize. Relief washed over Anissa. He hadn't killed her. A grin spread across her face. "Are you apologizing?" Dietrich asked. Anissa, flustered, admitted she was actually just relieved. Dietrich shrugged it off. "No big deal," he said, then turned to Olrich. "Why are you still here?" Startled, Olrich quickly made his escape. Anissa replayed the events in her mind, realizing that things hadn't turned into a disaster. Dietrich's future right-hand man was unharmed, and contrary to her earlier fears, Dietrich wasn't as terrifying as she'd imagined. Sometime later, Anissa sat on her bed, feeling hungry and restless. She wasn't sure exactly how old she was, but she knew she'd seen 2 springs come and go since arriving at the Lagrange household. She sought out Lancel for food. Lancel offered her milk, which she refused. "I'm 2 years old now. I need something to chew on," she declared. Lancel, weary from work, replied that milk was food. He retreated to the sofa to rest. Anissa, dissatisfied, drank the milk, grumbling about its inadequacy. Watching Lancel snore peacefully, she gave him a hard whack. He didn't stir. She decided to take matters into her own hands and headed for the kitchen. It appeared empty, but she soon discovered a jar of chocolate. Realizing it was Lancel's secret stash, she fumed at his selfishness and decided to quickly indulge before he returned. Mid-bite, she was startled. A maid had entered the kitchen and called out to her. Anissa whirled around, her heart pounding. It was Jenny. Her eyes narrowed in disapproval. "What are you eating?" Jenny demanded sternly. It was then that Anissa realized the chocolate wasn't Lancel's, but Jenny's. Jenny continued to scold her, demanding to know why she was eating someone else's food. Anissa tried to deny it, stammering that she wasn't eating chocolate, but Jenny wasn't fooled. As Jenny tried to wrest the jar from Anissa's grasp, a struggle ensued. Anissa clung to the jar, but Jenny wrestled it away. Unfortunately, in the struggle, it slipped from her grasp and shattered on the floor, scattering the chocolate everywhere. This only fueled Jenny's anger. Anissa, feeling even more hungry and disappointed, thought to herself that she had only taken a little bit. She reached for a piece of the fallen chocolate, but Jenny slapped her hand away, scolding her for stealing. Stung by both the blow and the harsh words, Anissa's eyes welled up with tears. Sadness and frustration washed over her. She muttered under her breath, thinking that she was just a child and didn't deserve this treatment. Jenny, unmoved by Anissa's tears, continued to berate her, demanding to know how Lancel could have raised her to be this way. She couldn't fathom why Anissa was crying over something so trivial. Anissa, hurt both physically and emotionally, continued to weep. Anissa cried out, her sobs expressing her sorrow and frustration. She questioned Jenny's cruelty, especially when she hadn't even had enough to eat. Jenny remained impassive, accusing Anissa of stealing the chocolate and crying for no reason. She pinched Anissa's cheek, calling her annoying, causing Anissa to wince in pain. Jenny continued to grip her cheek, warning her that there were consequences for misbehaving. Anissa, still crying, tried to explain that she was just hungry, but Jenny ignored her pleas, sarcastically asking if Lancel hadn't fed her. Anissa explained that Lancel had only given her milk, which only seemed to harden Jenny's demeanor further. It wasn't her problem, she said. Annoyed by Jenny's attitude, Anissa thought to herself how mean she was. As Jenny turned to leave the kitchen, she threatened to lock the door to prevent any further incidents. Desperate and still hungry, Anissa grabbed Jenny's clothes, begging her to wait. Jenny, exasperated, asked what she wanted. Anissa, tears streaming down her face, pleaded with Jenny, telling her how desperately hungry she was. Jenny responded with a harsh, dismissive suggestion. Anissa should go into the forest and eat wild animals, just like young Master Lancel. Anissa stared at her, stunned. Shaken by the cruel suggestion, Anissa watched as Jenny slammed the kitchen door shut and left. Wiping her tears, Anissa decided to take a walk in the garden to calm herself. She tried to reassure herself that everything would be all right, but as she walked through the garden, she noticed that despite it being spring, there were no flowers or fruit. The air was a little chilly, and she couldn't help but think that this garden was a villain's favorite kind of place. This was where the children lived, and despite Dietrich's abilities, they seemed to struggle even for food. As she continued walking, Anissa noticed Dietrich roasting something over a fire. She ran towards him excitedly, calling out Appa, and happily sat down beside him. She told him she missed him, but Dietrich immediately rebuked her, asking who gave her permission to sit. Noticing something different about Dietrich, Anissa commented that he seemed to have gained some weight, and she felt it was worth it, having given him so much milk. Dietrich, clearly uninterested in the topic, told her not to mention it again. As Dietrich roasted the chicken over the fire, Anissa couldn't help but drool. Dietrich noticed, asking her why she was drooling so unattractively. Embarrassed, Anissa quickly wiped her mouth, apologizing for the unsightly display. However, Dietrich didn't seem to mind and offered her some of the chicken. Anissa hesitated, insisting that Dietrich should eat it himself. But Dietrich, without another word, ate it. Watching him, Anissa realized he was the type who wouldn't leave leftovers. She couldn't help but pout. She asked if it was good, and Dietrich confirmed that it was. Anissa, slightly disappointed that she hadn't gotten any side. Dietrich, noticing her expression, asked what was wrong. Anissa told him about Ginny pinching her cheek for stealing the chocolate. Even though the chocolate had fallen on the floor, Anissa still felt that Ginny pinching her cheek was completely uncalled for. Dietrich listened quietly, his expression conveying understanding. As Dietrich stood up to leave, Anissa quickly asked him where he was going. He replied that he was going into the palace and told her to wait for him there. Despite feeling uneasy, Anissa reluctantly agreed. Meanwhile, Dietrich approached a room within the palace, summoned a dark aura, and entered to confront a terrified Jenny. Jenny screamed as a shadowy energy constricted her throat. Dietrich's voice was cold as he stated that he didn't care if she stole money from the Lagrange household or looked down on him. But letting Anissa go hungry was his limit. While he sometimes found her annoying, he didn't want her to suffer or starve. Outside in the garden, Anissa sat shivering, both from the cold and from hunger. Feeling abandoned, her despair deepened. "He's a liar," she muttered, referring to Dietrich leaving her to wait. Angry and tearful, she decided to take matters into her own hands and walk towards the palace. To her astonishment, Lancel brought her a proper meal. Anissa, overjoyed, thanked Lancel profusely, finally able to eat something decent. She wondered what had prompted this sudden kindness. Lancel encouraged her to drink the milk, sending her into raptures. She praised him, remembering how difficult it had been to get milk before. Filled with gratitude, Anissa planned to bring Dietrich more milk later. She approached him happily, calling his name and offering him the milk. Although somewhat reluctant, Dietrich accepted the milk after Anissa's persuasion. Then Anissa offered him a cookie, boasting that she had stolen it. But Dietrich told her to eat the cookie and he would drink the milk. As Dietrich drank, Anissa felt a surge of pride, but a sudden wave of anxiety washed over her as she thought about his future as a villain. She silently hoped that whatever path he took, he would continue to be kind to her. She cheerfully bid him farewell, but Dietrich stopped her, seemingly unsure of her name. Anissa, annoyed, corrected him. Dietrich extended his hand, offering her a piece of fruit, and asked if she could eat it. Anissa happily accepted the fruit from Dietrich, thanking him and feeling a swell of pride that he seemed to be warming up to her. As she ate the fruit, she was captivated by its sweet and sour flavor, and mistakenly thought his comment about her resembling a chick was a term of endearment. Dietrich offered her more fruit, which she happily consumed, declaring it delicious. Noticing her tears, Dietrich asked why she was crying, but Anissa insisted it was just because the fruit was so good. Dietrich bluntly stated that he didn't know if all babies were like her, because all the other babies were dead. This sudden dark statement filled Anissa with dread, but she decided to ignore it, attempting to climb onto the high bed beside him. She slipped as she struggled to pull herself up, but Dietrich caught her, helping her safely onto the bed. Anissa was grateful for these small acts of kindness from Dietrich, believing them to be the result of her persistence in getting close to him. She recalled the mere exposure effect, the idea that frequent contact builds attachment. She believed her efforts were finally being recognized. However, as she moved closer to him, Dietrich flinched away. This left her confused. Despite his protests, Anissa happily hugged him, expressing her affection and gratitude. She thanked him for the cherries, exclaiming how touching it was to see someone originally perceived as a villain perform acts of kindness, even as Dietrich hesitantly tried to get her to let go. She nuzzled his hand, continuing to express her fondness. Dietrich responded nonchalantly, but Anissa persisted, cheerfully declaring her affection for him. Anissa pouted, feeling frustrated that despite her confidence in her own cuteness, Dietrich didn't seem to find her adorable. She wondered if it was because they looked alike. When Dietrich offered her another cherry, she happily accepted it, taking it as a positive development. However, when Dietrich casually mentioned the cherries might not be poisoned, her joy turned to panic, sending shivers down her spine. Anissa felt betrayed, a surge of anger rising within her at his carelessness and ingratitude. She recalled the Lagrange family's cruel rules, where poisoning was a common tactic in the battles for inheritance. Her anxiety intensified as Dietrich chuckled. Finally, he reassured her, saying the deadly game of eliminating siblings was over and no one would dare poison him. Anissa felt a wave of unease wash over her as Dietrich nonchalantly spoke of his immunity to poison, a result of his mother Camille poisoning him daily. As part of their twisted family tradition, she found it incomprehensible and repulsive, further solidifying her inability to understand the Lagrange family. Suddenly, Marion, a young maid, entered the room, greeting Anissa warmly. Anissa ran to her excitedly, embracing her and expressing her fondness. Marion affectionately praised Anissa's cuteness while gently chiding her for running so recklessly. Anissa responded with laughter and playful affection, filling the room with a cheerful atmosphere. Dietrich silently observed their interaction, a strange sense of exclusion washing over him. Anissa briefly felt a cold gaze upon her. But when she looked back at Dietrich, his placid gray aura made her wonder if she had imagined it. Marion offered to take Anissa back to her room, and Anissa readily agreed. Thinking about how kind and friendly Marion was, the first adult Anissa had felt close to, she couldn't believe she'd met someone so nice after Janine's departure. Marion picked Anissa up, and Anissa waved goodbye to Dietrich, but he ignored her, leaving Anissa feeling dejected. Despite this, she felt content having Marion, the only sane and kind person in the mansion. Later, in the garden, Anissa excitedly called out to Dietrich, but he corrected her pronunciation, insisting she say his name properly. Confused, she tried several times, but he then began teaching her to call him Opa. When she realized Marion wasn't around, she anxiously asked Dietrich where she had gone, but he responded coldly. Anissa admitted she missed Marion, keenly feeling the contrast between Marion's warmth and Dietrich's coldness. Though Dietrich no longer ignored her as he had before, he didn't interact with her the way Marion did. Anissa reflected on her need to learn more about the world around her, from the strange family to the tales of shadow demons, realizing how much she didn't know. Dietrich informed Anissa that Marion had been temporarily sent to another palace, but he didn't know when she would return. Anissa became downcast, insisting she wasn't crying, though Dietrich seemed to find her potentially curious. He asked her why she liked Marion so much, and Anissa replied that Marion would read and tell her stories. Dietrich suggested Anissa might need more toys. Though she hadn't meant that, Dietrich, using his black aura magic, summoned a portal from the ground. This startled Anissa. From the portal emerged a horned, demonic, shadowy entity, the Demon King Bell, whom Anissa recognized from the novels. Bell inquired why he had been summoned. Dietrich casually instructed him to play with Anissa, who looked bored. Anissa, terrified and bewildered, questioned Dietrich as to why he would make such a frightening being play with her. Despite his reluctance, Bell agreed to the command. As the Demon King approached, Anissa, overwhelmed by his aura of death, covered her nose and protested loudly. However, the Demon King cheerfully shook a rattle, startling Anissa, who refused it. But the Demon King, enjoying himself, rhythmically shook it, unexpectedly bringing a sense of delight to Anissa. Though she tried to remain unresponsive, she couldn't help but giggle at the strange yet calming sound. Dietrich watched, seemingly satisfied. Anissa realized the Demon King, Bell, was relishing the whole situation. Later, Anissa was shocked to learn of Marion's dismissal, unable to fathom the reason. She asked Lancel if Marion had done something wrong, but he responded nonchalantly with a dismissive who knows. Anissa was heartbroken. Marion had been the first adult to show her kindness. Lancel, indifferent to her feelings, shrugged it off, saying Marion was just a maid. Anissa's temper flared, and she lashed out at Lancel. She called him a stupid idiot, but he retorted sarcastically that he'd forgotten to order her meal, implying she might go hungry that day. Anissa was taken aback by his words, but her anger intensified when she realized Lancel faced no repercussions for his treatment of her. It wasn't fair, she fumed. Kind Marion was dismissed, while negligent Lancel remained unscathed. She resolved to tell Dietrich what had happened. Hesitantly, Anissa stood outside Dietrich's room, recalling his warning against entering without permission. Without further thought, she knocked, but when the door didn't open, she pushed it open forcefully and entered. Stepping inside, she was startled by a gust of cold air from the open window, a sharp intake of breath catching in her throat. She couldn't understand why the window was open. It was dangerous to have open windows in the palace without coal or firewood. She called Dietrich's name, but he didn't answer, deepening her confusion. Following the sound of faint, labored breathing, she hurried forward to find Dietrich in a wretched state, feverish and weak, lying with a blanket barely covering him. She noted with concern that the blanket should have been thicker, her worry growing when he still didn't respond properly to her calls. Dietrich was clearly irritable, telling her to leave, but Anissa refused to go, telling him it was too cold and asking if he had any medicine. Even as he tried to push the blanket away, rejecting her help, she persisted, annoyed by his stubbornness, yet still concerned. Anissa pouted, her care evident. She wasn't afraid of his illness. She simply wanted to help. Despite his protests, she noticed that while there was water for washing, it seemed no one was properly caring for him, especially considering how dangerous a cold could be for a child. Anissa wet a cloth, wrung it out, and placed it on Dietrich's forehead, but some water dripped onto his face. Flustered, she quickly apologized. Dietrich, annoyed, grabbed the cloth and threw it away, insisting she take it away. Undeterred, Anissa smiled, picked up the cloth, and replaced it on his forehead, thanking him for helping wring out the excess water. This only infuriated him further. Ignoring his anger, Anissa laid down beside him. Still irritated, Dietrich asked if she intended to leave. She responded with a playful suggestion that a hug might warm him up, explaining it was a good way to stay warm when it was cold. His anger erupted. Grabbing her by the collar, he deposited her in a chair, telling her she was too loud and making his headache worse. Dietrich stumbled back to bed, clearly unwell. Watching him, Anissa realized how bad his condition was and decided to be quiet. She mentioned his door being locked, and he told her he'd locked it specifically to keep her out. Irritably, Dietrich opened the door and asked Anissa what she wanted. Standing outside, happily playing with a twig, she cheerfully announced that he was awake. Dietrich impatiently reminded her to be quiet. She replied brightly that she had been quiet, explaining she'd brought the twig for firewood. Dietrich, bewildered and dismissive, thought she might be a fool, but his fever clouded his judgment, and he resignedly told her to do as she pleased. She happily followed him inside. That night, the siblings slept. In the dead of night, Dietrich jolted awake as a dagger flew through the window, aimed directly at him. He blocked it just in time, startling the would-be assassin. Dietrich swiftly retaliated, throwing the dagger back and wounding the attacker. He sighed in frustration. Dietrich watched Anissa, still fast asleep, grumbling to himself about his restless slumber while she remained blissfully unaware of any danger, sleeping soundly. He recalled her strange behavior, how she had sought out Marion, the maid, oblivious to the fact that Marion was Lrangee spy. He couldn't fathom why Anissa preferred the human maid to Belle, the demon, who was superior in every conceivable way. Puzzled by her actions, he wondered if she stayed by his side for protection or if she had some other motive. His thoughts drifted back to Anissa, and he noted how she seemed to possess an unusual understanding of his predicament from the very beginning, despite her sometimes irritating presence. He realized that his protectiveness towards her wasn't solely due to their blood ties. He thought of the final stage of the inheritance test, the requirement to sacrifice what one cherished most to become the Grand Duke, the demand to relinquish all vestiges of humanity. Asmodeus, the demon guardian of the Lagrange family, demanded that the Grand Duke sever all attachments. To become a cold, power-hungry entity, men like Dietrich Lagrange, to secure the title of Grand Duke, had offered to Asmodeus their tamed demons, their lovers, their friends, even their own family members. Dietrich gazed at his sleeping sister, Anissa, and contemplated what would happen if he had nothing precious to offer. The Demon King appeared, explaining that in such a scenario, he would end up like Roderick Lagrange, a powerful contender who failed because he lacked something sufficiently precious to sacrifice. The Demon King pointed out that the timing was opportune. His little sister would serve as the ideal offering, and he urged Dietrich to cherish her. Dietrich questioned whether Dietrich Lagrange or Asmodeus would be fooled by such a scheme. The Demon King assured him that both would be deceived, as humans inherently cherish their family, making them unquestionable sacrifices. After a brief pause, the Demon King added a warning. He advised Dietrich not to cherish Anissa too deeply. Dietrich denied that he valued Anissa above his own safety, claiming he had always planned to use her as a sacrifice for the inheritance. Despite his cold words, he gently stroked the sleeping Anissa. He felt an unexpected pang of guilt, wondering if he had been unknowingly poisoned, and resolved to be cautious the following day. Anissa played with the Demon King, who offered her a bottle of milk. Anissa delighted in the strawberry flavor, marveling at how the Demon King could change the taste with a mere shake of the bottle. She found him surprisingly capable and polite, despite his ominous aura. When the Demon King addressed her as princess, Anissa hesitated but accepted his explanation. He clarified that, as Dietrich's chosen monarch, he served Dietrich as king, thus making Anissa a princess. Anissa pondered why Bel had chosen Dietrich as his monarch, surprised by his young age and assuming Bel must be quite fond of him. Bel denied this, using magic to levitate books and Anissa herself. Placing her on his knee, he mentioned that Dietrich had instructed him to emulate Marion, the maid's duties, including reading to her while she sat on his lap. Anissa found him soft, like a marshmallow. When she touched an inappropriate area, Bel calmly explained that it was his genitalia, causing Anissa to become embarrassed and apologize. Bel reassured her and asked what book she wanted to read. Flustered, Anissa chose The Little Rabbit Behind the Moon, recognizing it as a familiar story. The Demon King expressed his fondness for the book, but was interrupted by a knock at the door. He quickly vanished, worried that being seen in such a casual state would damage his reputation as the Demon King. After his abrupt disappearance, Anissa considered how frightening he might appear at night. A voice called from outside, and Anissa, recognizing it as Marion's, excitedly rose to her feet, assuming Marion hadn't been dismissed after all. However, as Marion entered, Anissa noticed something amiss. Marion, explaining that her dismissal meant she could only head north, reached out to Anissa, urging her to come along. Anissa hesitated, instinctively recoiling, but Marion's tone hardened, insisting she come closer. When Marion demanded to know why Anissa was running, fear made her stutter. Marion grabbed her hand forcefully, pulling her closer. Terrified, Anissa screamed for Dietrich. Marion tried to soothe her, but Anissa noticed something was wrong. A vacant stare, an unnatural aura, and puppet-like movements suggested she was being controlled. As Marion embraced her, Anissa recalled past purification experiences and decided to try cleansing Marion's aura. Despite the pain of Marion's grip digging into her back, Anissa persisted, channeling her energy. Slowly, the red aura controlling Marion began to dissipate. Finally, it vanished completely, and Marion collapsed, freed from the influence. Anissa felt a mixture of worry and confusion at Marion's strange behavior and the intense pain. When Marion awoke, she began to tremble and weep. Deeply regretful of her actions, Marion repeatedly apologized, begging Anissa's forgiveness. Anissa, though sympathetic, was unsure what had transpired. She tried to comfort Marion, asking why she was crying, trying to reassure her that she hadn't done anything wrong. Anissa watched as Marion slumped to the ground. Panicked, Anissa called Marion's name. To her surprise, Dietrich appeared. He looked furious. Marion, still weeping, immediately bowed to Dietrich, pleading for forgiveness. Without a word, Dietrich scooped Anissa up into his lap. Anissa, confused and frustrated, couldn't understand why Dietrich hadn't come when she called for help earlier. Now, after she had cleansed Marion, he appeared, radiating anger. Marion confessed that although she served Lady Leatrice, she genuinely cherished Anissa and Dietrich. Hearing Leatrice's name, Anissa remembered her as Dietrich Lagrange's first wife, a powerful figure within the Lagrange family. Marion expressed her sincere affection for them, but Dietrich accused her of being a spy, linking her to Leatrice's clandestine activities. Anissa struggled to reconcile Marion's kindness with this revelation. Despite everything, she felt that Marion's aura had been genuine. When Dietrich raised his hand, Anissa tensed. She feared he was going to kill Marion. As Dietrich began to use dark aura magic on Marion, Anissa cried out desperately, begging him to stop. In a harsh tone, Dietrich ordered her to move aside and not interfere. Anissa, determined to protect Marion, stepped in front of her, pleading with him not to kill her. Dietrich was enraged by her interference, but Anissa, tears streaming down her face, held her ground, begging him to spare Marion. Marion, still weeping, insisted that she had been controlled by Lady Leatrice, begging Dietrich to punish her, claiming she never meant to harm anyone. Marion explained that Lady Veronica's demon had controlled her, but the control was now broken, and she was free from its influence. Anissa believed Marion, but Dietrich remained skeptical, demanding to know how she had broken the hypnosis. Marion admitted she didn't know, but her mind was now clear, a sign that Veronica's demon no longer held sway. Anissa considered revealing that she had used her radius ability to cleanse Marion's aura. But she hesitated. She worried that if she told him, Dietrich might enslave her, just like in the novels. Crying, Anissa desperately tried to protect Marion, telling Dietrich that if he killed her, she would hate him and refuse to give him milk. She even threatened to expose Belle's existence to everyone. Dietrich, initially shocked and angered by her words, then became despondent. Meanwhile, a terrified Marion pleaded with Dietrich for forgiveness, promising never to report anything to Lady Lrangee again. Anissa tried to comfort Marion, while Dietrich, after observing the situation, Anissa finally breathed a sigh of relief, silently grateful that her crocodile tears had worked. Marion, overcome with emotion, continued to weep and apologize profusely, while Anissa continued to comfort her. Anissa embraced Marion, soothingly telling her not to cry. Meanwhile, Dietrich reflected that the existence of Baal, the demon king whose power rivaled even the sun god Hera, had to remain a secret until he became the Grand Duke. At the same time, he pondered Anissa's earlier words. Her words about hating him gave him pause. He gave a faint smile, dismissing her statement as a childish threat. Dietrich convinced himself to cease his aggression towards Marion, not because of Anissa's intervention, but because he deemed dealing with the spy unnecessary. He saw Anissa merely as a future sacrifice in the trials of succession, not as family, not even as a person. 3-year-old Anissa practiced her swordsmanship in the garden, closely guarded by the Demon King. He observed her, praising her technique. He advised her not to leave any openings when she raised her sword. Thrilled by the praise, Anissa eagerly followed his instructions, thinking she might have a talent for swordplay. She noted that the Demon King, renowned for his swordsmanship, was a surprisingly good teacher. He even magically enhanced her arm strength and gifted her a beautiful sword to encourage her. As Anissa practiced, she playfully attacked him, and the Demon King humorously played along. He pretended to be struck down by her blows, much to her delight. While practicing swordplay with the Demon King, Anissa questioned whether she had actually hit him. The Demon King dramatically exclaimed that it hurt, which annoyed her, and she accused him of lying. She turned away, stating he hadn't lost at all. The Demon King tried to appease her, feigning exhaustion as he wiped his brow, which only disgusted Anissa further. He then hesitantly mentioned something Dietrich had told him, but trailed off mid-sentence, leaving Anissa exasperated. She demanded to know what Dietrich had said, but the Demon King evaded her question. Furious, she threw down her sword and stormed off, declaring that she hated him. Despite her anger, the Demon King calmly requested that they get along, a smile playing on his lips. Now suspicious, Anissa wondered what Dietrich could have possibly told him to stop their sparring. While exploring, Anissa discovered a dog door in the garden. Curious about its purpose, she pondered where it might lead, but decided against asking Baal, Dietrich, or Marion, knowing they wouldn't permit her to venture outside. Convinced the other side was also a garden, she decided to explore for herself and crawled through. She emerged into a lavish garden, stunned by the sight before her. Unlike the simple garden she'd left behind, this one boasted golden fountains that seemed to be encrusted with diamonds. She briefly considered taking a diamond to help the Dahlia Palace's finances, but quickly dismissed the idea. Looking around, Anissa began to sense an unusual aura, realizing this garden belonged to a luxurious palace. Hearing shouts, a startled Anissa gasped and quickly retreated back through the dog door. Back in her own garden, she hid, breathing heavily, thinking that with such loud fighting, the absence of screams meant the person must be strong. Though she tried to suppress her curiosity, as new voices reached her, she heard someone angrily yelling about blue eyes, threatening to gouge them out if they weren't closed. Alert, Anissa began to connect the dots. Lost in thought, she peered through the dog door and saw a group of boys beating another boy, Olrich. They taunted him, saying he couldn't even land a single blow on Dietrich and was a disgrace to Lrangee's palace. After leaving Olrich bruised and battered, the group casually decided to leave, abandoning him where he lay. Anissa pondered. If there was no game involved, then surely mutual slaughter wasn't allowed. Olrich had mentioned Lrangee's eldest son, Alphonse, and his intense hatred for Dietrich. Curiosity piqued. She asked if he felt the same, recalling how Alphonse's dislike stemmed from seeing Dietrich as a rival. She teased, mentioning she'd even shared cookies with Dietrich and wondered aloud if Olrich hated her too. Olrich hesitated, stammering without a clear answer. Noticing his flustered state, Anissa figured he probably didn't like her and decided to change the subject. Innocently, she asked why he had been beaten, pointing out he didn't even live in Dahlia Palace. The question seemed to darken his mood. Realizing her misstep, she listened as he mumbled that it was because of his blue eyes. Anissa felt a pang of sympathy. She leaned closer to examine his eyes, catching Olrich off guard. He blushed, stammering and speechless. Casually, she remarked that his blue eyes were beautiful. When he questioned her, incredulous, she firmly repeated the compliment, increasing his fluster. Anissa directed Olrich to the fountain, enthusiastically pointing out how lovely his eyes looked in the reflection. Olrich, however, denied her words, insisting they weren't beautiful at all, that they looked like a southerner's eyes, which he disliked. Unfazed, Anissa questioned what being like a southerner had to do with anything. Olrich explained that the Lagrange children harbored a deep-seated hatred for southerners, and that he, by extension, disliked his own eyes. Changing the subject, he asked Anissa what she was doing there. Before she could answer, Dietrich arrived, and Anissa immediately ran to him. Noticing the marks on his cheek, she fretted, but Dietrich brushed off her concern, demanding to know why she was there and if Olrich had brought her. Olrich cowered at the accusation, but Anissa quickly explained that she had come on her own out of boredom. Dietrich was unimpressed, reminding her that she had Ball to entertain her, referring to the Demon King as though he were a mere plaything. Inwardly, Anissa disagreed. Ball was her teacher and caretaker. He would be hurt if he heard Dietrich speak of him that way. Hoping to change the subject, Anissa grasped Dietrich's fingers, asking who had hurt him. Dietrich vehemently denied being hurt, but she remained worried. Anissa pressed him, vowing to confront whoever was responsible herself. She urged him to tell her, promising to protect him as she had been diligently practicing swordsmanship with Ball. Her determination made Dietrich sigh and offer a dismissive chuckle, making Anissa wonder if he was mocking her. Undeterred, she smiled and reiterated her promise. Dietrich finally scooped her up, preparing to leave, ignoring her protests. Meanwhile, Olrich watched them, recalling a strange rumor about Dietrich. It was said that he cherished his little sister, Anissa, the one left behind after Camille's death. The idea of a Lagrange caring for a sibling seemed preposterous, but Olrich now considered the possibility. He decided he would tell Lady Leatrice. If they could confirm it and exploit this apparent weakness of Dietrich's, it might give them an advantage, he thought. However, as Anissa waved cheerfully to him, Olrich hesitated, unsure of the rumor's validity, and decided to wait and see. A few days later, Anissa lay in bed, reflecting on her 3 years at Dahlia Palace. Despite being there for so long, she realized she had only seen a small fraction of Dahlia Palace and the Leatrice Palace gardens. Yearning for a change of scenery, during a recent visit, she asked Marion if they could visit Von Castle. Marion, after a moment of thought, mentioned there wasn't a strict rule against it and suggested they go together, as she needed to fetch some sugar. Anissa, thrilled with the idea, readily agreed. When they reached the garden entrance of Von Castle, Marion played briefly with Anissa before asking her to wait on a bench while she fetched some sweets from a maid she knew. Marion reminded Anissa not to wander off, emphasizing that the castle was much larger than Dahlia Palace. Anissa cheerfully waved goodbye, promising to stay put. However, as soon as Marion disappeared from sight, curiosity got the better of her. Unable to contain her excitement, Anissa left the bench. She couldn't wait to explore this place, rumored to be 3 times the size of Dahlia Palace. Suddenly, Anissa heard a shout. Startled by the harsh words, she instinctively hid herself to observe the scene. She saw someone mercilessly beating Dietrich, yelling at him. The person berated Dietrich, claiming he was worthless without demonic powers. He also mocked Dietrich's pride, adding that the seal, originally intended for brief use during lessons, would now be extended as punishment. He demanded that Dietrich reflect on his behavior, and then left. As soon as the man was gone, Anissa rushed to Dietrich's side, her voice filled with concern. She asked if he was all right, but he countered by asking how she had gotten into the castle. Anissa explained that she had come with Marion, but then noticed the chains on him, realizing with a shock that they were seals typically used to restrain prisoners with immense power or dangerous abilities. Dietrich calmly explained, with a detached air, that the man believed he could only participate fairly in lessons if his abilities were sealed. Anissa, realizing the true nature of the situation, thought to herself that Dietrich's explanation wasn't the whole truth, suspecting that Alphonse's weaker abilities were the real reason for this mistreatment. Worried, she asked if the seals hurt. hurt, to which Dietrich indifferently replied that they didn't. When she inquired about the key, he told her the man had taken it and wouldn't unlock the seals until tomorrow. Anissa then asked why he wouldn't look at her, wondering if Dietrich was ashamed of being seen beaten. He denied being embarrassed, saying he hadn't been hit that hard. She insisted, however, that it was understandable, as the man who hit him was an adult, while Dietrich was still a child. Dietrich retorted that only those permitted to act like children were weak. In response, Anissa gently patted his forehead, surprising him. She confidently declared that she would soon learn to use a sword so she could protect him, emphasizing that he was still a child who needed protecting. Dietrich started to retort, pointing out that if he was a child, so was she, but was interrupted by Marion's panicked voice calling out for Anissa. Anissa quickly turned, surprised to see Marion running towards her. Marion hugged her tightly, expressing her worry and relief, scolding Anissa for frightening her. Anissa softly apologized, admitting her fault. Marion then noticed Dietrich, remarking that it seemed Anissa had been with the young master. She gently cautioned Dietrich to be careful, pointing out that it was easy for children to get lost at this time of year. Dietrich, however, dismissively replied that he wasn't as careless as her. Marion apologized awkwardly, explaining she was just worried. As Dietrich turned to leave, Anissa silently considered him. No matter how she thought about it, Dietrich didn't seem like a villain. After all, what kind of villain would be bullied by a servant? She recalled that Dietrich had swordsmanship lessons once a week, and returned with seals on him after being summoned to Von Castle. Anissa confronted Ball, demanding he remove Dietrich's seals. Ball explained that the seals held holy power, not only preventing him from using his powers, but also draining his energy. Anissa angrily declared Ball useless. The Demon King replied that although he didn't have a heart, her words still hurt him. Dietrich appeared and told Anissa not to take her anger out on Ball. Anissa asked how the seals could be removed. Dietrich replied that he only needed the key she mentioned. Anissa wanted to confront the knight who held it, but Dietrich warned her to hide if she ever saw him. The knight was one of Derek's most trusted and also Leatrice's younger brother. Anissa considered this, realizing the knight's confidence stemmed from his powerful connections. Despite being the heir, Dietrich was treated with disdain, all because the seals hampered his shadow abilities, leaving him vulnerable to knightly assassins. Looking at the weary Dietrich, Anissa was determined to find a solution. Recalling the beautiful human war, where Leon Euler, Leatrice's brother, was a significant supporting character, she speculated he might have a weakness she could exploit. Anissa remembered the strange relationship between Leon's father, Marquis Euler, and Derek. She concluded that if Dietrich couldn't act directly, he could use Derek as a tool against Leon. The Demon King commented that Anissa wore a cunning smile like a witch, but she ignored him. Resolute, she vowed to find the perfect opportunity to strike against Leon Euler. A few days later, Anissa asked Lance about Marin's whereabouts. Lance expressed his displeasure with haughty indignation, claiming he'd cared for Anissa since she was a baby. Anissa, unconvinced, pressed him, and Lance revealed that Marin had been summoned by Leon Euler. Anissa, shocked, immediately ordered Lance to take her to Marin. Grumbling about her becoming more troublesome, Lance complied. Arriving at the garden, Anissa was appalled to find Leon Euler, the same man who had beaten Dietrich, harassing Marin. Leon pressured Marin for a date, claiming she was good enough and shouldn't have any burdens. Marin firmly refused, reiterating her lack of interest in marriage. Leon criticized her age, implying her value would diminish with time. Anissa watched, silently fuming at his arrogance. Marin pleaded with Leon to leave her alone, stating she no longer served Lady Leatrice. Leon scoffed at her decision, calling it foolish, and urged her to return to Leatrice instead of staying in this dilapidated place. He then derided Dietrich, calling him an arrogant bastard, unfit to be the Duke due to his lack of support and slave blood. He declared the Euler family held the power to decide the Lagrange successor and disparaged the current ruler of the North, saying he was old and obsessed with women. Leon revealed Derek had entrusted him with a key, claiming it not only unlocked the seals, but also a sealing stone in the basement. He emphasized the Euler family's control over the family, then attempted to manipulate Marin, promising to take only 2 concubines at most if she joined him while she still had her charm. Leon touched Marin, igniting Anissa's fury. As he left, he told Marin to consider his offer. Anissa noticed his aura buzzing with excitement. She saw this as an opportunity to follow him and discover his weaknesses, determined to avenge his treatment of both Marin and Dietrich. Leon arrived at a secluded spot by a wall and whispered into a hole, asking if the money had been brought. A voice answered in the affirmative, inquiring about the sealing stone. Anissa, hidden nearby, heard everything. She recalled the Lagrange family's renown for handling demons, using sealing stones to control uncontrollable ones. For the Lagrange family, shadow demons represented power. But Leon was secretly selling this precious asset. She watched as Leon handed over a red stone, questioning the other party's sincerity. The person behind the wall reassured him, handing over money and promising to go straight to the bank. Leon laughed, expressing his trust in the deal. Anissa realized she had leverage against Leon. While the Lagrange family held a fearsome reputation within the empire, Anissa recalled their traditions, such as the winter banquet held to ward off the chill on cold winter nights. Anissa asked Dietrich to take her to the banquet, using the excuse of wanting to eat the winter pudding. She knew he wouldn't take her if she revealed her true purpose of accusing Leon, so she lied. Dietrich warned her that no good would come of it, especially if Derek discovered her presence. Anissa, feeling insulted when Dietrich remarked she wasn't pretty enough, remained adamant. Annoyed but resolute, she recalled Marion's compliment comparing her to a fairy. Finally, Dietrich relented, telling her not to leave his side and to behave. Anissa, thrilled, thought to herself that clinging to Dietrich always worked. When they arrived at the banquet, Anissa was impressed by its grandeur. Grand Duke Derek Lagrange greeted them with a false smile. Dietrich sat beside him, introducing Anissa as his younger sister. Derek, noticing Anissa, commented that she didn't seem afraid at all. Anissa chuckled inwardly, thinking Derek must have forgotten her. An elderly man looked surprised to see Anissa. He commented that girls were rare in the Lagrange family and mentioned that he hadn't had a headache in the castle today, which was unusual. Another lady chimed in, saying she had been experiencing a headache. Anissa realized her purification upon entering had worked, as people's auras had seemed murky. As Anissa continued to observe, she noticed Leon still leering at Marin, despite her previous rejections. Anissa thought angrily that Leon was too old for her and shouldn't be acting that way. She decided to take action, figuring that Derek, a man who enjoyed making others fear him, might be intrigued if she appeared more afraid of Leon. While planning her next move, Anissa suddenly began to tremble. Derek, noticing Anissa's nervousness, asked her what was wrong. Anissa, pleased to have caught his attention, feigned fear and looked towards Leon. Derek, sensing her discomfort, questioned why she was looking at Leon that way. Anissa, pretending to be frightened, told Derek that Leon was more frightening than the Duke. She alluded to Leon's previous threats, and Marin confirmed that Leon had said the Lagrange family was controlled by the Euler family. Leon tried to deny it, but Anissa continued, saying she saw Leon give a gem to another person in exchange for money. Leon froze, terrified. As Derek realized it might be a sealing stone, Leon tried to deny everything, but Derek ordered him to leave. A lady named Dietrich, seated nearby, attempted to defuse the situation, saying the banquet night was still young. It would be best to deal with Leon after the banquet. Derek agreed, deciding to have Leon return his key and leave after the banquet concluded. After the banquet, Dietrich told Anissa to sleep on her own, but Anissa, worried he was angry, reminded him of his promise to behave during the banquet. Dietrich coldly replied that he didn't need her help. Anissa defended Marin, saying she was a good person, but Dietrich dismissed the notion, saying there were no good people in the castle and that compassion wouldn't do her any good. Anissa insisted compassion wasn't a bad thing, but Dietrich considered it shameful. Anissa explained that if someone needed help, they should receive it, adding that Marin was indeed a good person. Dietrich questioned how she could know that, but Anissa, smiling, said she just knew. Dietrich warned that she would be deceived for her naivete, and Anissa confidently disagreed, insisting she hadn't been deceived. Finally, Dietrich told her to come closer, and Anissa, thrilled, assumed they would sleep together. She snuggled up to him, feeling warm despite the cold, thinking about how winter was passing and how comforting it was to be together. Anissa and Marion sat on a bench, Anissa telling Marion about her aspirations to become a knight. She wanted to be able to protect Marion from harassment by people like Leon. She admitted, though, that unless she honed her skills and learned swordsmanship from Bale, she was more likely to end up a wandering mercenary than a knight. Marion, however, responded that she didn't need Anissa's protection. She should be the one protecting Anissa, though she conceded her own weakness. Suddenly, a stranger appeared in the withering rose forest. He introduced himself as Lord Joseph Louis Euclid, but Anissa, surprised by his name, questioned if he was truly of the Euclid family. Joseph confirmed this, revealing himself to be a traitor. He explained that his younger brother had been the Grand Duke of Euclid, but Joseph had killed him and defected to the Lagrange family. Anissa was astonished to learn that, given his traitorous status, Lord Joseph could potentially be her great-grandfather. Noticing her red eyes, Joseph asked if they had always been that way. Marion confirmed their clear, ruby-like hue. Joseph expressed surprise, saying it had been too dark at the banquet to notice. He speculated that she might be the savior of the North, something Anissa had heard of before. Joseph went on to explain that the Lagrange family worshipped demons, the Euclid family the sun god, and some believe in the prophecy of Aridia. According to the prophecy, a blue-eyed child would save the North. Anissa realized that the prophecy likely referred to Saint Charlotte, the heroine destined to save Dietrich, but she couldn't understand why Joseph would be looking for her among the Lagranges. Joseph then muttered about Camille failing, mentioning that the child had been killed. This worried Anissa, fearing he might know about her time in Euclid. She told Joseph that what he was saying was strange. Joseph apologized and offered her some candy. He mentioned that being around her cleared his head, like entering Aradia's temple. Anissa, slightly startled, became wary, realizing that if Joseph discovered her abilities, her identity might be exposed. Later, Anissa returned to Joseph's home, where he greeted her, asking if she had come back to hear more about Aridia. Anissa eagerly agreed, not wanting to miss the opportunity to gather more information. Joseph acknowledged her interest in Aradia's story, explaining that Aridia had the ability to influence the feelings of others. While she couldn't make someone who hated her fall in love with her, she could influence those who felt indifferent. Joseph shared that he, like her, was interested in Aridia. Anissa asked Joseph why he was at Lagrange Castle, since they didn't believe in Aridia. Joseph explained that his primary interest lay with demons, not the sun god, Hera. He revealed that Aridia had fought demons and could break their curses. He had experimented with the power of sacred trees, using them to create demons, but didn't elaborate. Anissa was curious, but Joseph quickly changed the subject, offering to show her a sacred tree, a type that could no longer grow in the north due to the dark shadow over the land. Joseph presented the tree, explaining that it had the power to suppress curses. Anissa found this useful, and Joseph gifted it to her, saying he had several. He mentioned that while the tree wouldn't grow without Aradia's power, keeping it close could help invigorate the spirit. However, Joseph warned that the tree was incompatible with her brother, Dietrich, because his demon, Bale, was incompatible with Aradia's power. Anissa realized that Dietrich's aura was difficult to read because of his connection to the demon king, Bale. While she initially thought Bale was ruthless, she was beginning to notice a gentler, even endearing side to Dietrich, believing he wouldn't grow up to be a villain. On her way home, she heard a scream and saw Dietrich standing alone amidst several corpses. Terrified, Anissa began to back away, but Dietrich noticed her and approached. Anissa, nervous, stumbled and tried to explain why she was there. But Dietrich picked her up, telling her as he walked that the garden was dangerous at night. Anissa mentioned that the sun hadn't set yet, and Dietrich promised to take her another time. She pondered quietly, recognizing that in a world where adults readily harmed children, kindness towards her was paramount. Anissa had been living in Dietrich's palace for 5 years. One day, Dietrich stumbled into her room, covered in blood and wounds. Anissa cried out in shock, noticing his injuries, but Dietrich angrily told her to leave. Seeing the blood and fearing Dietrich might die, Anissa rushed to find Marion for help, thinking Marion's connection to Von Castle could be of assistance. She also considered seeking Joseph's help, but decided to go Marion first. As she ran, Anissa accidentally bumped into someone and heard a chilling voice. It was Derek. Terror seized her, and she froze, unsure what to do. Sensing danger, Derek asked where Dietrich was. Anissa, feeling the intensity of his rage, panicked, convinced that Derek had come to kill Dietrich. Derek decided to go directly to Dietrich's room. Desperate, Anissa considered the situation, recalling Derek's love for Lrangee and his desire to help Alphonse, hoping these factors might influence the outcome. However, Dietrich was gravely injured, and Anissa feared that if she left him now, he might not survive, just like in the original novel. In her desperation, Anissa summoned the Demon King, Baal, begging him to take her to Dietrich immediately. Baal responded and teleported Anissa to Dietrich's side. Frantic, Anissa urged Dietrich to escape, warning him that their father was coming. The weakened Dietrich asked if Baal could stop Derek, but Baal replied that in Dietrich's current state, it was impossible. Frustrated, Anissa kicked Baal, insisting he protect Dietrich. Baal suggested using her as a medium, but Dietrich refused. After some arguing, Baal agreed to bring someone else who might be able to help. With a snap of his fingers, Olrich suddenly appeared from a portal. Confused and surprised by the sudden appearance, Anissa waved, greeting Olrich with a long time no see. Baal informed them that the Lord was coming. Before Olrich could fully grasp the situation, Anissa and Baal vanished. At that moment, Derek entered the room. Still bewildered, Olrich called out, "Father." Derek, surprised, asked Olrich why he was at Dahlia Palace. Hidden, Anissa observed that despite Olrich's presence, Derek's killing intent remained undiminished. Olrich spoke nervously, and Derek, irritated, told him to leave. Derek apologized to Dietrich, noticing his injuries and acknowledging his talent. Anissa realized with fury that Derek was responsible for Dietrich's wounds. Dietrich calmly agreed that he would be careful. Derek insisted that Olrich leave so he could speak with Dietrich, but Anissa knew that if Olrich left, Dietrich would be killed. She cried out and rushed forward, clinging to Olrich, making excuses to prevent him from leaving, begging him to play with her. Confused and nervous by Derek's presence, Olrich tried to pull away, but Anissa insisted he couldn't leave. Annoyed, Derek grabbed Anissa by the collar, insulting her, and suggesting he could sell her into slavery to recoup the expenses of her deceased mother. He sneered, calling Anissa's mother, Camille, a waste of money, and stating that selling Anissa now might be more profitable. Anissa trembled, thinking Derek was insane. Dietrich explained that Anissa had special abilities, simply underdeveloped due to her young age. Seeing a potential profit, Derek commented that skilled slaves were expensive. Dietrich smiled, countering Derek's point by stating that Anissa still carried the Lagrange name, and selling her into slavery would tarnish the reputation of the powerful Lagrange family. Derek, the ruler of the North, released his grip on Anissa, letting her crumple to the floor. He demanded her name, and she stammered, her voice trembling, that she was Anissa. Ordering her to go to sleep, Derek departed the room. Overwhelmed by terror, Anissa rushed to Dietrich, clinging to him tightly. Seeing her trembling form, Dietrich patted her gently to soothe her, realizing that caring for her had become an almost instinctive act. Anissa asked if he was all right, and a wave of tenderness washed over Dietrich. In that moment, he realized she was far more precious to him than he had initially thought. A premonition of danger, a shadow lurking just ahead, flickered through his mind. Later, Anissa snuck towards the dog door, intending to meet Olrich. Olrich, his voice laced with nervous energy, told her he'd warned her not to keep coming and try to stop her from crawling through. Instead of Anissa using the dog door, Olrich vaulted over the wall to meet her. Anissa, impressed by his agility, realized that despite his casual demeanor, he was still a candidate for inheritance. Introducing himself as Olrich, he questioned why she had come again. Anissa, her curiosity piqued, inquired about Dietrich's whereabouts. Olrich, puzzled, questioned why she would ask him. He explained the disparity in their stations, pointing out he hadn't even decided whether to contend for the inheritance. Anissa realized the futility of her visit. Teasingly, Anissa asked Olrich why he seemed so weak. He admitted to his weakness, and she then complimented his beautiful eyes, causing Olrich to blush and deny the compliment. Just then, Dietrich arrived, abruptly pulling Anissa back and glaring at Olrich. Anissa was surprised to learn Dietrich had told Olrich not to play with her. Olrich, slightly disgruntled, pointed out that it was actually Anissa who had grabbed his ankle, summoning him. Dietrich made Olrich uncomfortable with a touch, prompting him to question Dietrich's actions. Dietrich then challenged Olrich, asking what he would do if he admitted to his father that he had summoned him. Olrich, growing increasingly irritated, bristled at Dietrich's teasing. Anissa interrupted, asking Dietrich where he had been. Noticing Olrich's expression, realizing he was on the verge of tears, she observed that despite Dietrich's harshness, His usual gray aura remained, and she recognized it as the lingering influence of Baal's power. She also noted that Dietrich seemed to be a composed individual, making it difficult to discern his true thoughts. Dietrich, upon hearing that Anissa had been looking for him, pulled his hand away from hers. He told her to stop seeking him out, stating she was old enough to start being independent. With that, Dietrich departed, leaving Anissa stunned by his words. Anissa, becoming emotional, was annoyed by Dietrich's behavior. Feeling hurt and frustrated, Olrich tried to calm her, but she cried out, complaining about Dietrich's mean and despicable attitude. She felt that despite her kindness towards him, Dietrich was ignoring her, and she was determined to persevere. However, she hadn't seen him for days and grew more despondent. Anissa asked Baal where Dietrich was, but Baal claimed ignorance. Anissa angrily accused Baal of lying, calling him Dietrich's den demon, but Baal corrected her, saying it was demon, not Denon. Annoyed by Baal's correction, Anissa grumbled about his pronunciation, expressing her frustration at being misunderstood. She decided to ignore both of them, figuring that as a 5-year-old, her social development might be a little slow, but still good enough. As Anissa attempted to crawl through the wall opening, a boy suddenly yanked her back. She yelped, startled by the sudden grip. The boy insulted her, questioning if she was Dietrich's sister and mocking her perceived lack of ability. Anissa recognized him as Alfonso. Dismissing her as insignificant, he scolded her harshly, commenting on her supposed love affair with a slave. Anissa struggled, protesting that she had nothing to do with him and that she was looking for Olrich. Alfonso demanded an answer, shoving her roughly, causing her to fall. Gripping her collar, he accused her of provoking Dietrich. When he retaliated with a harassing touch, Anissa bit his hand, making him shriek in pain and fling her away in a fit of rage. Alphonse roared at Anissa, furious. He accused her of being disrespectful and ignoring him, threatening to hit her. Anissa squeezed her eyes shut, trembling, and cried out for Dietrich. Suddenly, a magical aura struck Alphonse, sending him flying. Anissa, bewildered and frightened, puzzled over the aura, initially thinking it was Amon, but then questioning who else could possess such power. She then saw Olrich and the Demon King, Baal, approaching. Olrich scooped Anissa into his arms, scolding her for being in danger and asking why she had sought him out. Anissa explained that she hadn't seen Dietrich. Olrich, irritated, impatiently brushed aside her concerns, then answered her unspoken question about the monstrous being behind him, revealing it was his demon. Anissa's eyes widened in recognition, remembering Dietrich had given him the same demon. Astonishment warred with worry as she considered the fact that Dietrich had given Amon to Olrich. Why hadn't she received one? Pouting, she demanded a demon from Olrich, but he refused, explaining that forming a contract with a demon could be dangerous if the person was weaker than the demon and unable to control it. The demon would be taken away, and the original contractor would lose their life. Frustrated, Anissa asked if it didn't matter if Olrich and Dietrich died, but she couldn't. Olrich smiled faintly and patted her head, saying everyone dies eventually. Anissa froze, tears welling in her eyes, stunned by the harsh reality of the world around her, unable to comprehend how children like them could survive such cruelty. Olrich explained to Anissa that Dietrich likely kept her around because protecting her must be troublesome for him, though he hinted that Dietrich might have other motivations. Anissa, confused, asked if Dietrich was truly protecting her. Olrich confirmed that he was, especially since Letrus's children wouldn't dare harm her for fear of him. She then wondered who protected Dietrich, but Olrich remained silent. Anissa pondered the idea of protection. The hero, Herman, was protected by the nation, and Saint Charlotte had powerful backing, but Dietrich, as the villain, seemed to have no clear protector. Just then, Veronica Lagrange, the poisonous flower cultivated by Letrus and the only adopted inheritor candidate, approached Dietrich, asking who was protecting him. Dietrich, surprised, asked what she meant. Veronica mentioned Anissa, his sister. Veronica then questioned Olrich about who protected Dietrich, but Dietrich sharply told her not to lay her eyes on Anissa. Veronica responded in a playful tone, reminding Dietrich that he wasn't the head of the family yet, and shouldn't be ordering her around, while simultaneously complimenting him. Dietrich, annoyed, told her to get lost and walked away. Unfazed, Veronica sarcastically remarked that she was hurt by his words. Dietrich responded with disdain, mentioning that Letrus's subordinates seemed to not know how to control themselves in front of humans. He continued, stating his preference for cats over dogs, and told Veronica to go take care of Alphonse. Veronica, intrigued by his mention of siblings taking care of each other, sarcastically asked if Dietrich truly cared for his sister. She then proceeded to injure Alphonse, making him scream in agony. Veronica mocked Alphonse as he writhed in pain, accusing him of betraying Mother Letrus simply for receiving good treatment. Alphonse angrily defended himself, claiming to be his mother's favorite son. Veronica scoffed at this, stating that while she still loved her mother in a way, she had pledged her loyalty to her and judged his chances of becoming the head of the family to be low. Alphonse coughed up blood in fury, but Veronica remained unmoved, saying that if someone as weak as him could become the head, it would be dangerous for her too. Satisfied that he would be incapacitated for a while, she left him. Veronica then went to look for Anissa. Anissa, curious about whether she was Dietrich's sister, felt a surge of excitement and joy upon seeing Olrich. She was even more delighted that he had brought her bread, remarking on how much he had grown. Meanwhile, Veronica hid behind a tree, observing Anissa, who appeared like any ordinary child. Sensing something amiss, Anissa approached the tree and called out, wondering if it was Bale. Veronica, startled, realized her shadowy hiding spot had been compromised. Anissa, with her keen sense of smell, detected an unfamiliar scent and asked again if it was Bale. Veronica emerged from her hiding place and greeted Anissa. Anissa, startled by her sudden appearance, nervously asked who she was. Veronica introduced herself as Veronica Lagrange. Recognizing her as Letrus's daughter, Anissa was struck by Veronica's beauty. She had expected Veronica to be frightening, given her control over Marilyn, but found her aura comforting, comparing her to the moon in a children's book. "It's like the scent of sad grass," Anissa remarked. Veronica, puzzled, asked what she meant, questioning how a scent could be sad, suggesting it was more like the fragrance of poison roses. But Anissa insisted it wasn't poisonous, just sad. Excitedly, she offered Veronica some of the bread Olrich had given her. She explained that eating something delicious is good when you're sad, hesitating slightly before offering the entire piece, as bread was precious within the Dahawa palace. But Veronica declined the bread. Anissa, remembering Dietrich's lesson about not asking twice, decided to eat it all herself. As Veronica turned to leave, Anissa was confused, wondering what the point of her visit was if she was just going to depart. She pondered the sadness she sensed in Veronica's aura, thinking it was the saddest she had ever encountered. She assumed she wouldn't see her again. One day, as Anissa and Olrich sat in the garden, Veronica appeared unexpectedly. She commented on seeing Olrich, startling both him and Anissa. Olrich quickly positioned himself in front of Anissa, nervously demanding to know why Veronica was there. Veronica, with a smile, teased Olrich about his rudeness, suggesting he needed some training. Olrich, still wary, denied they were siblings and expressed suspicion about Veronica's intentions. Anissa, confused by Ulrich's reaction, hesitantly greeted Veronica. Veronica replied with a casual hi, to which Anissa responded, "Hi, sister." Olrich now sternly warned Veronica against speaking to Anissa, accusing her of coming to kill Anissa while Dietrich was away. Veronica, without hesitation, confirmed Ulrich's suspicions, admitting she wouldn't be at the Palea Palace otherwise. Olrich stood firm, but Veronica simply replied lies. Despite the tension, Anissa, with a warm smile, gently took hold of Veronica's fingers and innocently asked if she had come for bread. Veronica shouted at Anissa, declaring she had come to kill her. But Anissa, smiling, embraced her, finding her aura friendly. Olrich pulled Anissa away, warning her of Veronica's dangerous nature, explaining that she had killed her own family and joined the Lagrange family. Veronica, enraged, kicked Olrich. Her aura flared blood red, and a demon materialized beside her. Olrich, realizing she was about to attack, summoned his own monster, Amon, to confront Veronica's demon. He grabbed Anissa, urging her to flee with him, but Anissa, determined to stop the fight, stood between the two monsters. Veronica yelled at them to stop fighting, suggesting they should bring her bread instead. Later, Anissa sat by the fountain, pouting, food discarded on the ground, upset by the situation. Veronica approached Anissa and offered her a macaron, asking if she had ever eaten one before. Anissa, eyes widening in recognition and mouth watering, realized it was a macaron. She eagerly accepted, asking Veronica if she really meant to give it to her. After finishing the macaron, Anissa was moved to tears, utterly captivated by its delicious flavor. Veronica, surprised, asked why she was crying. Anissa explained that it was simply too delicious, a level of confectionery quality she hadn't encountered since her rebirth. Veronica expressed astonishment, wondering aloud how Dietrich could possibly have been raising his sister. Just then, Olrich arrived, carrying a large bag. Seeing Anissa eating the macaron, he immediately rushed over, warning her not to eat it, worried it might be poisoned. But Anissa had already finished it, assuring Veronica of its deliciousness. Olrich, frantic, scolded Anissa for eating the macaron, wondering if she'd been starved at Dahawa Palace. Anissa simply smiled, brushing off his concerns and thanking Veronica for the treat. Veronica offered her more, but Olrich firmly told Anissa not to eat anymore. Walking with her sword in hand, Anissa pondered her current situation. She felt a pang of loneliness at not being able to find bail, but remained determined to continue her sword practice. She thought about the future, whether to help Dietrich or protect herself if, as in the original story, she was used and then discarded. She worried about whether she could handle the children who had made contracts with demons and a lack of progress with the holy plant Joseph had given her. Anissa also considered whether she should form a contract with the shadow demon who had failed to become the demon king due to his personality. As she walked, Anissa noticed something surprising on the ground. A macaron. She picked it up, but her eyes widened in surprise as she saw more sweets. Cream puffs, chocolate pastries, even donuts. She wondered if it was a trap. Although she didn't sense any malice, she was even more shocked when, continuing on, she saw a chocolate fountain. Suddenly, Veronica appeared, asking Anissa if she liked the food. Anissa, practically drooling, admitted she loved it, asking if Veronica had prepared it all for her. Veronica replied that it was originally meant for other children, but she ended up giving it to Anissa first. Anissa, delighted, found the excuse rather unconvincing. Veronica urged her to eat, explaining that normally one would use a knife to cut the pastries. Anissa indulged in the food, feeling incredibly happy and satisfied. Veronica then offered her pudding, which surprised Anissa. She asked why Veronica was giving her so much, but Veronica casually avoided the question, joking that Anissa ate like a pig before realizing it. Veronica mentioned she had considered poisoning the food, but decided against it to avoid trouble with Dietrich. She assured Anissa that the food wasn't poisoned, saying there was no reason to harm someone like her. Veronica also mentioned that Anissa reminded her of a child. Anissa told Veronica she knew all along that she wouldn't poison her. Veronica questioned why, stating she could kill Anissa at any moment, but Anissa confidently replied that Veronica's aura always felt warm. She declared that she liked Veronica. Veronica, shocked, asked if Anissa liked her more than Dietrich, not noticing Dietrich standing right behind her. Anissa excitedly agreed. Dietrich, standing behind Anissa, remarked that he hadn't received a single sweet. Startled, Anissa quickly changed her answer, saying she liked Dietrich more, denying what she had said just moments before. Veronica commented on how quickly Anissa changed her tune, and Dietrich coldly told Anissa that it didn't matter. Anissa wondered why Dietrich was being so cold now. Dietrich then told Veronica that he never permitted her to wander freely around Dahawa. Veronica, slightly mockingly, asked if he was going to give her permission now, but after Dietrich glared at her, she reluctantly agreed to clean up everything she had brought. Suddenly, all the food was taken away by the servants. Anissa, shocked, cried out with tears streaming down her face, lamenting the disappearance of her chocolate fountain, which she had been saving for dinner. Veronica, standing beside her, questioned her distress over the clear desserts, stating that such treats were available every night after dinner. Anissa, her voice trembling, explained that Dahawa was impoverished and food was scarce. Veronica mentioned that since Dietrich was now at the top of the candidate list, they should have plenty of money. But Anissa retorted that they didn't even have enough firewood for the winter, let alone desserts. Dietrich interrupted, telling Veronica not to speak nonsense and pointing out that Derek Lagrange was holding him back. Anissa couldn't understand why Dietrich refused Derek's help, thinking he should take advantage of it. Veronica playfully asked Dietrich if he had enough money for sweets, offering to take care of Anissa. Anissa readily agreed, but Dietrich immediately refused, saying Anissa's teeth would rot. Veronica, laughing, decided to leave. Anissa, dejected, questioned Dietrich's refusal, attempting to lighten the mood by showing off her swordsmanship practice. But he walked away angrily, mentioning her calloused hands from the practice. Anissa felt confused and frustrated, unable to understand Dietrich's recent aloofness, especially since they had been growing closer. Later that evening, she followed him with a lantern, asking if he'd enjoyed his dinner, but Dietrich simply replied it was all right. She noticed he was walking strangely and asked if he was injured. Dietrich had sprained his ankle earlier while dealing with an assassin and had been secretly enduring the pain. He was surprised Anissa had noticed, as even Derek hadn't. He recalled a previous conversation with Derek, who had warned him about the dangers of caring too much for others, implying that relationships could become weaknesses. Dietrich, wincing, tried to ignore Anissa's concern, but she insisted on helping, blocking his path, and demanding he treat his injury. Dietrich coldly dismissed her, telling her not to follow him, saying she didn't know what he was planning for her. Anissa firmly stated that she cared for him because she liked him. Calling him kind, he replied that she didn't know the real him and walked away. Anissa, saddened, pondered his words, feeling misunderstood. The next day, she visited Joseph, asking what he was doing. Joseph, initially not noticing her, explained he was going to Romandolf's forest, a neutral zone in the territorial dispute between the Euclids and the Lagranges. Anissa asked if demons weren't interesting anymore, and Joseph revealed that war was imminent. He suggested taking her to Romandolf, where the Grand Duke couldn't harm her. He assured her Dietrich would survive, but she wouldn't. Joseph proposed she become his assistant, saying she didn't need to ask permission. Anissa worried that Joseph would get into trouble, but he assured her the Grand Duke couldn't easily kill him. And besides, he had Dietrich. Anissa recalled how the original Anissa had been used by Dietrich as a tool to monitor her malevolence. She considered leaving Lagrange before any potential conflict erupted. Anissa saw Dietrich, lacking adult protection, as just a child in a difficult situation. Joseph, concerned for Dietrich's well-being, was determined not to leave him alone at Lagrange. He expressed his worries to Anissa, who reassured him that Dietrich was her family. Joseph then gave Anissa an opal, explaining it was an ability amplifier. Although Anissa hadn't yet manifested her abilities, Joseph urged her to keep the opal safe and not sell it. A while later, Anissa wondered who Joseph was talking to. Dietrich looked surprised as he scooped Anissa up, warning her about the dangers of the natural world and telling her not to wander away from Dahawa. Anissa pondered Dietrich's blunt nature, a reaction that didn't go unnoticed by Joseph. Joseph asked her why she was laughing. Smiling, he remarked that it was the first time he'd seen Dietrich laugh. Anissa was astonished, questioning whether Dietrich had actually laughed, but then dismissed the idea, thinking that Dietrich wasn't the kind of bad person who would take advantage of her. Resolved in her affection, she hugged him, noticing a hint of a smile on Dietrich's face. Afterwards, Anissa headed to the hole in the wall to meet Olrich. Olrich, she called excitedly. He was startled, asking why she always came through there. Anissa suggested they go out for a walk, but Olrich hesitated, explaining that children who weren't the offspring of top candidate families weren't allowed to leave the castle. However, after a bit of coaxing, Olrich agreed, mentioning he wanted to buy something. Anissa asked Olrich if he had a lot of money. He replied that he didn't have much. Anissa playfully teased him about being useless, but then immediately backtracked, praising him as the best. Olrich then showed her a bag of money, which made Anissa's eyes light up. "Are you giving it to me?" she asked, Olrich wondered why she needed it. Anissa pouted, asking why he'd shown it to her if he wasn't going to give her any. They continued on their way, with Olrich asking Anissa what she wanted to buy. She excitedly replied that she wanted to buy a lottery ticket. Olrich asked if they should tell Dietrich. Anissa reassured him it was fine, as Dietrich was busy lately with his candidate duties. Olrich, flustered, told Anissa that he was busy too, and this wasn't just playing around. Anissa laughed, thanking him for accompanying her and complimenting him, saying both his eyes and heart were beautiful. Olrich blushed, begging her not to say such things, arguing that they weren't in the South. Anissa stopped, commenting on how innocent Olrich was, which made him protest that he wouldn't take her out again. Anissa, finding him adorable, told him he was lying. They arrived at their destination, and Olrich showed his identification to enter. As they strolled, Anissa wondered aloud why no one had asked who she was. Olrich explained that Lagrange had many children her age. Anissa, feeling reassured, began to take in her surroundings. Seeing so many people living there, she realized this was a real world, not just a fictional setting in a novel. Olrich asked her what she was looking at. Anissa replied that while their garden fountain was more beautiful, it was more interesting outside. Olrich expressed regret for not taking her out sooner, surprised by how much she was enjoying herself. Anissa reflected on how she had changed Olrich. She realized her actions to change the original story weren't in vain. She felt like she was truly living in a real world. She was determined to survive by altering the preordained narrative. Olrich then showed her a dagger, asking if it was beautiful. Anissa, startled, thought it was a knife. Olrich confirmed that it was. He explained that he had always wanted this knife, revealing that its black color was due to the blade being infused with dark magic, making it a blood-drinking knife. Anissa responded hesitantly, acknowledging its uniqueness, while Olrich mentioned that if blood coagulated on it, it needed to be thoroughly cleaned. Olrich casually mentioned that he could teach Anissa how to slit a throat without splattering blood next time. Anissa was shocked, thinking about how she needed to change the original story and leave Lagrange. She then spotted someone, excitedly pointing them out, telling Olrich that it wasn't his sister, but someone else. As they followed and spied on Veronica, a man screamed in terror, begging her for mercy. Anissa watched, both impressed and appalled, noting that at 10 years old, Veronica had used a dagger. Now, at 15, she wielded a whip. A man confessed his wrongdoing and pleaded for forgiveness, but Veronica, with a cold smile, confirmed his guilt, stating that she was going to punish him. She furiously accused him of revealing her ability to see shadows to Dietrich Lagrange. The man pleaded, reminding her that he was her uncle. He mentioned the Lagrange family's desire to control demons, adding that even her mother hadn't wanted her sent to Lagrange. Veronica's rage intensified. She roared, her voice thick with fury, that her entire family had died because of him, accusing him of selling her mother's life for money and land. His pleas fell on deaf ears. She killed him, standing over his corpse. Her aura shifted from red to a chilling blue. Anissa rushed towards her, crying out. But Veronica flinched, turning to her with an attempt to downplay the situation. Anissa questioned her actions, and Veronica, visibly nervous, tried to explain. Veronica confessed to Anissa that she'd been caught, admitting her darkness. She explained that if she didn't unleash her fury, she would torment others until they died. She told Anissa not to see her as good, that she wasn't the kind of moon Anissa thought she was. Anissa reassured her, saying she'd never called her moon because of goodness, but because of her beauty. When Veronica asked if Anissa found her terrifying, Anissa replied that she didn't. Veronica pointed out that she had tortured the man, but Anissa embraced her, comforting her, saying that Veronica had punished a bad man, and that it was okay for good people to get angry. Touched by Anissa's words, Veronica smiled, thanking her. Olrich approached them, feeling like an outsider. But Veronica ignored him, asking Anissa why she was in St. Dana, mentioning that Dietrich was in charge of the area. Scooping Anissa up, Veronica offered to buy her a lottery ticket. A stunned Olrich reminded Veronica that Anissa was supposed to buy tickets with him. Anissa, beaming, told Veronica she liked her and agreed to go, mentioning they needed to go to the casino. Olrich, disgruntled at being excluded, grumbled about their sudden decision to go together. Veronica criticized his tone, and Anissa playfully joined in, chiding him for his lack of respect. Olrich, feeling hurt, asked if they were really going to treat him this way. Sensing his distress, Anissa relented, inviting him along. Together, they headed towards the casino. Upon reaching it, a guard stopped them, stating that children weren't allowed inside. Veronica confidently introduced herself as Veronica Lagrange, fixing the guard with an icy stare. Intimidated, the guard immediately bowed in apology. Inside the casino, Anissa, noting the lack of windows, took in the unfamiliar surroundings. Veronica spotted a window, pointing it out as the likely place to buy lottery tickets. Anissa excitedly read a sign that said St. Dina Gold and Silver Counter, wondering if they sold lottery tickets there. Overhearing her, a man confirmed that they did, asking if she wanted to buy one. When Anissa inquired about the price, he told her it was 2 copper coins. Anissa turned to Olrich with an adorable expression, mentioning she only had one. Olrich admitted he'd spent all his money on a dagger earlier, leaving them both short of funds. But she wasn't discouraged. Anissa approached the counter with her single copper coin, politely requesting a ticket. The man behind the counter reminded her that a ticket cost 2 copper coins. But Anissa, with her disarmingly charming, doll-like face, pleaded for a discount, explaining her lack of funds. The man hesitated, explaining that lottery tickets weren't typically negotiable. But her innocent, pleading eyes melted his resolve. Unable to resist her cuteness, he reluctantly accepted her single copper coin and handed her a ticket. Anissa excitedly showed Veronica her lottery ticket, her face beaming. Veronica asked if she really liked lottery tickets that much. Anissa replied enthusiastically, saying you only live once, and if she won, she could buy Veronica something delicious. Veronica nodded thoughtfully. Suddenly, Veronica placed 3 blots on the counter, indicating to the vendor she wanted all the lottery tickets. Both Anissa and Olrich were stunned by her lavish gesture. Anissa quickly calculated that 3 blots equated to 3 million and was impressed by Veronica's extravagance. The vendor swiftly gathered all the lottery tickets for the week. The vendor, stuffing the tickets into a bag, mentioned the change, but Veronica waved it off. Anissa watched, thinking how incredibly cool Veronica was. Veronica handed the overflowing bag to Anissa, who, surprised, asked if they were really all for her. Veronica confirmed, brushing it off as nothing. Anissa, overflowing with gratitude, declared Veronica the best, her heart secretly brimming with confidence at holding so many tickets. Feeling left out, Olrich stammered that he had that much money too, just not on him at the moment. Anissa politely acknowledged him, then took Veronica's hand, suggesting they go for a walk. Veronica agreed, and they turned to leave the casino. Anissa spotted a group of children playing a shell game and, feeling a surge of excitement, decided to try her luck. As she approached, she realized that since children weren't allowed in the casino, these must be staff members. A boy named Marco played with an air of confidence, calling himself Hawkeye Marco, much to the annoyance of the girl beside him. Marco, after a swift shuffle, guessed the ball's location but hesitated when asked if he wanted to change his choice. Nervously, he switched his guess from the middle cup to the left. Anissa, carefully observing the game runner's aura, confidently told the girl next to Marco that the ball was under the left cup. The girl expressed doubt, pointing out that Marco had been watching intently. Anissa, a smug smile playing on her lips, declared herself a genius, insisting the ball was on the left. When the runner lifted the left cup, revealing the ball, everyone was stunned. The girl, astonished, asked Anissa how she knew. Anissa shrugged, confidently stating she just knew everything. The girl introduced herself as Charlotte Valandia, leaving Anissa frozen in shock. Charlotte was the sole female protagonist of the War of the Beautiful Men. Anissa was stunned, realizing the girl before her was the Charlotte Valandia. Though she briefly wondered if it could be someone with the same name, Charlotte's distinctive silver hair and brown eyes, coupled with her presence in St. Dana, a key location in the story, confirmed her identity. Charlotte, renowned for her powerful divine abilities, was originally a commoner. Anissa recalled how, later in the story, Dietrich had used half of the Lagrange family fortune to secure Charlotte a noble title. Meeting her so early was completely unexpected. Anissa, still in disbelief, repeated Charlotte's name softly. Charlotte, noticing her, asked if Anissa was a local. Anissa replied that she wasn't. Charlotte, too, admitted she wasn't from St. Dana, explaining she was there because of a strange prophecy she'd received. Anissa, intrigued, inquired about the prophecy. Charlotte, with a playful smile, said she'd tell Anissa if she could win the game. Anissa decided to play the shell game. With unwavering confidence, she correctly guessed the right and middle left cups, winning each round with ease. The game runner grew increasingly frustrated, questioning how a child could be so good, marveling at her seemingly impossible eyesight. Anissa, using her ability to read auras, mentally justified her actions as the runner was employing cheap tricks under the table, like switching the ball's position. The runner, eager to recoup his losses, proposed raising the stakes for the next round, clearly aiming to win back the money she'd won. As the next round began, Anissa noticed something unusual. The runner's aura wasn't reacting to any of the cups. This gave her pause, a flicker of suspicion crossing her face. Suspecting foul play, she bent down to look under the table, causing the runner to panic. She tried to stop him, but saw his aura flicker, confirming he'd palmed the ball under the table. The man, sweating with shock, demanded Anissa choose one of the cups. But she confidently declared the ball wasn't under any of them, and with a sharp tug, pulled the tablecloth away, revealing the ball hidden beneath the table. As the ball popped free, Anissa smiled triumphantly, a sense of unearthed talent thrilling through her, and demanded her winnings. The man hesitated, flustered, and uneasy. Accusing her of cheating, he insisted her impossible success was a deception. Anissa, a flicker of nervousness in her eyes, denied the accusation. A nearby girl with fiery red hair spoke up in Anissa's defense, accusing the man of cheating and demanding her own money back. The man, growing more frustrated and flustered, snapped at the gathering crowd, calling them immature for gambling. He grabbed Anissa by the collar, startling her, and loudly demanded to know what trick she had used. Frightened, Anissa looked around for help, insisting she hadn't used any tricks, wondering where Olrich and Veronica had gone. Just then, Dietrich appeared. A large snake slithered towards Anissa, startling the man who held her. Anissa recognized the black serpent. A basilisk, she thought. Dietrich sternly asked Anissa what she was doing there. Recognizing him, she moved as he directed. She noted his rare red aura, realizing he'd kept a pet snake since he was young. Dietrich stood before the startled man, asking who he was. Dietrich replied coldly, introducing himself as Dietrich Lagrange.